Marvel, YLS it Invincible. Chapter 21. Who are you, boy? When John arrived at his men's territory, he didn't find any of his men. Instead, he first saw an Audi parked in the middle of the road with its license plate blocked, and Robert leaning on the car. Squeak. There was a sound of brakes, and John couldn't help but feel more confident when he saw the team that had arrived. He asked Robert again condescendingly. Boy, let me ask you, who are you? What just happened here? You still have 5 minutes to speak. As his voice fell, the boys who got off the car or the van all picked out the guys, as if Robert would be chopped into pieces if he didn't cooperate. Really? 5 minutes? He turned his attention away from the phone, as if he had just heard John's words clearly. I think you didn't want to talk to me properly. Brothers, please teach him. John was obviously angered by Robert's words. Following his order, dozens of people out of the hundreds gathered around him, holding cold weapons in their hands, as if they were preparing to teach Robert a lesson. Ah! With a disdainful smile, Robert disappeared directly in the next second. Ah! Forehead. What? He is not a human. Run away. Give me what to run for. Robert knocked down more than a dozen people to the ground with his first attack and completely lost their fighting ability. Some gang members had never seen him attack so quickly and decisively. Some of the gang members were timid and wanted to run away, but were stopped by other members with guns. Down. Since you are so good at fighting, I want to see if you can withstand bullets and other things. John obviously knew that he was in trouble, but he didn't care, because this time he came out with a big guy. Nodding to the side, the man next to him immediately ran to the back of a car, opened the trunk and took out the contents. Brothers, get out of the way. I want to see if this guy can withstand the cannonball. After the test was over, combined with Robert's strength shown within a few seconds, he immediately launched his ultimate move. The members of the Dead Game gang who were armed with cold weapons and those who were still standing began to retreat slowly, while those members who were armed with weapons or even rifles began to drive Robert into the center like they were chasing something. They kept a certain distance from Robert but did not get closer. When Robert tried to get closer, they shot to suppress him. Go see God, boy. John looked at Robert who was already surrounded. He hesitated for a moment and decided not to let the rocket launcher launch, but just let people shoot at Robert in the middle. It's boring. Robert curled his lips and realized that he had actually been just playing with John, but since the other person started fighting as soon as they met, he couldn't hide it anymore. What is that thing? Don't come near me. Ah. Boss, save me. Robert directly sent a space teleportation, and all the boys of the Dead Game gang were teleported to unknown places. In fact, the teleportation originally did not cause any harm, and the reason why those people screamed so heartbreakingly may just be fear. However, although teleportation originally does no harm, the destination of the teleportation cannot be guaranteed, because when Robert does not have the exact coordinates, the destinations of those people are random. Volcanoes, Hawaii, airless space, polar ice rivers, extraterrestrial planets, etc. are all possible. You are a human or a ghost. John looked at himself, Robert, and his car alone. Now he felt an unprecedented fear. If he hadn't been in a high position all the time, which made him take face so seriously, he might have knelt down and begged for mercy by now. Nothing, just let them go to see God, now it's your turn. As Robert spoke, a blue light suddenly appeared on his hand. John knew this. It was the thing that made his men disappear in endless fear. Gudong. He swallowed hard and saw that Robert was about to hit the blue light at him. He quickly knelt down and begged for mercy. Wait, I surrender. The so-called face at this moment is worthless in John's eyes. After all, why do you need face when your life is gone? That's right. Since you have admitted defeat, let me talk about the business, which is about the compensation issue after your men stopped my car and attempted to rob me. Those fools. When he learned the reason why he was kneeling here begging for mercy, John was furious, not towards Robert but towards his men. I would like to express my most sincere apology to you for the behavior of those idiots. Please allow me to use all my worth as compensation. When John said this, his heart twisted violently. That was his savings for more than 10 years. Although it was impossible for him to really hand over everything, it would definitely be broken. But no matter how painful it was, he could only accept it, voluntarily, under the current situation. Ding, the transfer amounted to 18.04 million United States dollars. When Robert saw the text message on his phone, he almost burst into laughter. He really didn't expect that he would be able to pick up money even if he went out for a walk. Sir, in fact, I still have a deposit of 10 million US dollars that is temporarily being kept by the state representative Mr. Garden. Do you need me to get it over? John, who was still kneeling on the ground, looked at Robert's happy look. On the one hand, he felt contempt for sending him away with just such a small amount of money. On the other hand, he reminded Robert that he had a backing. Oh, okay. Robert didn't seem to understand. He waved to John and asked him to make a call. This greedy devil. While cursing Robert in his mind, John was preparing to call his backer. In his opinion, he would be safe if the state legislator intervened. After all, no matter who Robert is, he can't fight against the power of the government, right? When John was most relaxed physically and mentally, Robert was caught off guard and hit him with a space teleportation. This time, he was teleported away without even giving him a chance to speak. Boom! The roar of the engine tore through the originally silent night sky. Robert drove the car home as quickly as possible, and then opened his online bank to check the balance of his deposits. 1, 10, 100. 100,000, 10 million, 19.2 million US dollars. Robert had never seen so much money before, and he was a little dazed for a moment, so he took the simplest method to test whether he was dreaming. Hiss, ah. He pinched himself hard, and the real pain made him realize that this was a real world. In fact, from World War II to the current world of the 21st century, Robert feels a little unreal. Perhaps he has not adapted to this world yet. According to our news, military sources confirmed yesterday that Tony Stark has been confirmed missing. Affected by this news, Stark's stock price has plummeted again. As of press time, it has fallen to $572 US per share. Relevant industry insiders said that there is still the possibility of bottoming out. The TV is playing the hottest news at the moment, the disappearance of the billionaire Tony Stark and the stock price of his company. Wait a minute, if I remember correctly, the stock price of Stark Industries skyrocketed when Tony was found, right? Robert was sipping red wine. Originally, he didn't care much about the news, but a piece of news that suddenly came to his mind made him sit up straight on the sofa. After hurriedly downloading a stock software and registering his account, Robert checked the current stock price of Stark Industries. 571.9 is still lower than just now. Robert murmured and dragged the stock price chart forward to look at it. He found that at the peak of Stark Industries, it was nearly $800 per share. It seems that Stark Industries is still not going to work without Tony. Forget it, let's wait. Anyway, it will take Tony at least a week to escape. It's not too late to wait 2 days and come back to buy the bottom. After making up his mind and realizing that it was already a little late, he took a shower and went to bed. However, what Robert didn't know was that he could sleep well but others could not sleep well. Now I want to know what that guy John is doing and why he can't contact me anymore after he called me once. State Representative Garden was furious in his villa. He couldn't help but worry because another parliamentary election was about to be held, and if he didn't have financial support, he was likely to be defeated by his opponent. Mr. Congressman, we may regret to tell you that Mr. John is missing, but we found a large amount of property in his home, about 20 million US dollars. State Representative Garden, what about the 20 million this time? What about next time? I want not only the golden eggs but also the stupid chicken that laid the golden eggs. Let me find out where John has gone. After roaring on the phone for a while, after hanging up the phone, Garden panted and looked out the window. As the chicken that laid the golden eggs, John's disappearance made Hardin very irritated. How long will it take to breed another chicken? Single quote. Hardin, who looked out the window, was of course not attracted by the dark scenery outside, but was thinking about whether it was time to raise another chicken. Although it is still unclear what happened, with his keen sense of smell over the years, Hardin is probably up to no good. Where am I? What is that on my chest? Tony, who had just woken up in the cave, looked at a few copper wires hanging from his chest and a thing similar to a black box connected to him, and he was confused. Calm down, man, that's a battery, if it weren't for it you'd be dead right now. The sudden sound beside him made Tony quickly turn his head and look, seemingly seeing the confusion and slight hostility in Tony's eyes. The man explained. Don't look at me like that. I am the doctor who performed the surgery on you. In fact, you should thank me for being alive until now. Otherwise, the battery alone cannot save your life. Tony didn't completely believe what the other party said, because he remembered that he was clearly under the protection of a US military team before, but was suddenly attacked, and the moment before he fell into coma, it seemed. How come Stark Industries shells are in the hands of those people? Tony murmured to himself, and now he remembered that the shells that blew him up were the shells he made himself, and the original destination of those things was supposed to be in a US military warehouse, but the reality was that they appeared among terrorists on hand. You should ask yourself this question, Tony. Those are the weapons you made, but they were leaked out, and it seems there are quite a lot of them. Tony, they still have it. Outside the cave, Tony saw boxes after boxes, marked with Stark Industries labels. From light weapons to heavy firepower and artillery shells, it can be said that except for the latest research and development, this place has almost all categories of weapons from Stark Industries. You should have seen our strength. Now we want you to help make the kind of weapons you demonstrated to the US military. There was a doctor's translator on the side and Tony translated the terrorist's words, but he was arrogant and indifferent. All he saw now were the weapons he had made to maintain world peace. Are you willing to help us? Seeing that Tony didn't answer, the terrorist patiently asked again. At this time, Tony, who still had the airs of a billionaire, replied arrogantly, no. Give him some color and see. Following his command, Tony was dragged down, and they forced him into the water. The feeling was extremely uncomfortable, let alone for a pampered playboy. I cooperate. Finally, after going through countless tortures, Tony finally recognized the situation where man was the axe and I was the flesh, and finally chose to succumb. At this time, on the other side of the ocean in New York, USA, Robert was lying comfortably on the bed and dreaming about college. A few hours later. What, Uncle Robert, did I hear you right? You mean you are going to school? Did I hear you right, Uncle Robert? An incredible voice came from the other end of the phone, as if he heard something impossible. Yes, Dean, I'm so bored now. I feel like my body is getting rusty just lying around in the house every day. Sitting in the office of the US military base, Dean was silent for a while, and then he suddenly thought that the man he wanted to call uncle actually only lived for 18 years, because he spent the rest of the time sleeping in the ice. Okay, Uncle Robert, where do you want to go to school? After thinking about this, Dean was somewhat able to accept it. This request obviously had no problem with him, and it was just a surprise. Robert. Well, whatever, as long as the procedures are legal. Well, no problem, I'll help you get it done within 3 days. After saying a word of thanks, Robert fell down on the bed again. Last night he dreamed about his school days and suddenly felt nostalgic. After all, at that time he wanted money but not money, and appearance but not appearance. But now, Robert couldn't help but take out his mobile phone to check his balance. The number of nearly 20 million was his confidence, and the conclusion drawn by looking in the mirror countless times proved that his appearance was also online. It can be said that now he wants money, face, and even some power. In the United States, a country that serves capital, he can simply go sideways. I'm really looking forward to it. Lying in bed, Robert imagined the daydream that was about to come true. The happiness in life might be so simple and unpretentious. The next day Robert received a $1,000 subsidy from the government. Ding, the transfer amounted to 10 million. This is the benefit of having a backer. Looking at the text message displayed on his phone, Robert said to himself, if there is no help from Burns now, or if he fails to become a general, then Robert's situation is still unclear. I opened the stock software and saw that since the so-called golden 72 hours of rescue were approaching and Tony was nowhere to be found, Stark's stock price plummeted again after the opening, almost to the edge of the limit. Well, it seems it's not over yet. He feels that there is still room for decline, and it is not the best time to buy the bottom yet. It was another idle day. Robert was busy at home, while State Representative Hardin was extremely busy. After a night of following the clues, they finally found some clues, which was the last transfer record of John, the leader of the dead-end gang. How could the military get involved? It turned out that Hardin and the others found Robert's bank account, but it was not his own but a military account authorized for him to use. Then, Mr. Congressman, should we continue to investigate? The men next to Hardin were so frightened that they didn't dare to breathe, but they had to speak, so they could only bite the bullet and say, Hardin, what are you checking? That is an account that can only be authorized by first-level authority. Even if that person is not from the federal government, he has something to do with it. What I am afraid of now is that someone from the federal government will interfere in this election. Then let's. Failing weakly on the sofa, Hardin was unable to cope with the authorization of federal first-level authority. Take it easy first. Invisibly, the military background saved Robert a lot of trouble. At the gate of Midtown High School in New York City, it was already class time, but the principal and important personnel in the school were all waiting at the gate. To be honest, Uncle Robert, I can actually let you enter one of the top universities in the United States immediately. There is no need to come to this middle school. Dean said to Robert while driving in the car. Obviously he didn't understand now. Robert, there is a very interesting person in this school, Dean. Is my identity arranged? Obviously Robert didn't want to reveal more about this matter, and Dean was wise enough not to ask any more questions, but just followed his words. Yes, Uncle Robert. Ah, you are 17 years old as of yesterday. This is your proof of identity. As he spoke, he handed the things to Robert, who put them away smoothly. At this time, the car arrived at Zhongcheng High School. Ha, this is Midtown High School. Yes, Uncle Robert, if you are not satisfied, I can change it for you now. Come on, let's end this topic, okay. Come with me down first and take a look. The guys guarding outside seem to be here for you. Dean got off the bus first. The principal of Zhongcheng High School had obviously been informed by his superiors and immediately recognized the colonel. He greeted him with a smile on his face. However, Dean didn't seem to see him and got off the bus first. Open the door in person at the back. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Dean. Although Principal Zhongcheng was surprised by who Robert was and that Colonel Dean, who was treated with caution by his superiors, could be so humble, he was still surprised that he had not forgotten his identity. Dean just replied to the principal in a nonchalant manner, and then looked at Robert to indicate what else he had to do next. Just go back first. I can find the address of the school. From now on, I can just come by myself. You don't have to send me off. Robert knew that Dean, an Air Force colonel, should be very busy, so he didn't want to trouble others too much. Dean. Okay, Uncle Robert. Goodbye and have a great time at school. Dean originally wanted to call Uncle Robert, but when he saw Principal Zhongcheng standing next to him and a large group of people behind him, he hurriedly stopped talking. You are the principal, right? I don't want to say anything else. Just work hard for 2 more years. Your old superior is retiring soon. I think you understand what I mean. Before leaving, Dean walked up to the principal of Zhongcheng. His vague words made the principal excited, and he nodded repeatedly. Mr. Dean, I know what to do in the future. While they were talking, the school administrator had already taken Robert to the arranged class. Robert is about to take you to the best class in our school. I believe its teaching will definitely satisfy you. The man kept talking next to him. Robert was interested in talking to him at first, but later he really didn't know what to say. Seeing that Robert didn't answer his questions, the school administrator, who had a position similar to that of a dean, felt slightly uncomfortable. Okay students, let's turn to page 11 of the book. What we are going to study today is... Excuse me, Mr. Blaze, the new student in your class has arrived. On the podium, Blaze was about to teach a new class. He didn't expect to be interrupted at this time, but considering the identity of the visitor, he didn't choose to get angry. Okay classmate, I thought you would come in the morning, so can you please sit in that seat first? I'll ask you to introduce yourself later after class. Even though Blaze was slapped by the school administrator at the door, he still insisted on finishing the class as if he didn't see it. Hart Hall, the person whose status is second only to the principal in the school, is very dissatisfied with Blaze's reaction. You must know that the person next to him now may decide his future destiny with one sentence. Therefore, Hart would never allow Robert to be dissatisfied at all when he led him. He was about to have a good talk with Mr. Blaze, but he didn't want Robert to stop him, and then naturally return to good teacher. Following the guidance, Robert came to the seat indicated by Blaze and sat down. Then when he saw that the person who brought him to the door was still standing there stupidly, he couldn't help but give him a look. Hart was able to reach this position at the age of 40 just by relying on his own efforts. It is obvious that besides ability, he is also proficient in some other things, one of which is reading other people's minds. It turns out that this young master wants to pretend to be an ordinary person. Hart understood immediately and quickly closed the door and turned around to let Robert have fun. Okay, it seems that the irrelevant person is gone, so now let's continue the class. Please turn to page 11. This teacher Blaze seemed to be confident. Perhaps this was the arrogance of an ability person, but when he said the next thing, he seemed to have thought of something. Oh, this new classmate, if you don't have a book yet, you can read one with the classmates around you. I will help you ask after class. Robert nodded when he heard this, then glanced around, sat directly next to a person, took a bench over, and asked friendly. Robert Betty, can I sit here, please? Oh, okay. Hello Peter. Parker. Peter was a little confused by this new classmate, but he still did not refuse Robert's request. Okay, let's continue the lecture now. When Blaze saw that Robert had found a seat, he started to teach. He explained various formula questions passionately on the stage, while Robert, who was sitting below, felt as if he was being attacked by time magic. Because at this moment, he felt that time passed extremely long. Ring ring. As the hurried bell rang, Robert felt as if he had been saved. To be honest, it was a kind of torture if he couldn't understand the math class. Okay, class is over, let's invite the new students to the stage to introduce themselves as we just said. Everyone is welcome. There was sparse applause. Except for Peter, who was reading the same book with him just now, few people were applauding seriously. Idiot. The tall young man sitting in the middle seat saw Peter in the back row applauding seriously and cursed mockingly. Although the sound was not loud, many people around him heard it, including Robert. I'm sorry, this classmate, it seemed to me that you were scolding someone just now. Could you please tell me who you were scolding? Robert happened to walk next to the tall young man, who looked harmless with a smile on his face. Seeing that everyone's eyes were attracted here, Flesh was being asked in such a condescending manner, at least that's what he thought. Fresh doesn't want to lose face, especially in front of your girlfriend Mary next to you. I looked at Robert. Although he was tall, he was a little thin and seemed not to be aggressive. What I'm saying is that the idiot behind you who is applauding crazily for you is an idiot, do you hear me clearly? Fresh, who was used to bullying the weak, no longer paid attention to Robert, who looked harmless. He stood up and the muscles on his arms seemed to give him confidence. He looked directly into Robert's eyes and said arrogantly, Fresh, what do you want to do? Sit back in your seat. Robert first looked in the direction of Peter. He seemed to be so used to being bullied that he didn't even dare to raise his head. The one who spoke was the teacher Blaze. He was mainly afraid that Robert would be badly affected by being beaten. Snapped. Didn't your adults teach you to speak well? A crisp slap resounded in the classroom, and Robert said to Fresh, whose right face was instantly swollen. Oh my God, how dare he do this to Fresh? Hey, kid, what do you want to do? Fight. There was chaos at the scene. Fresh's friends all stood up when they saw their brother being beaten. All three of them were muscular men. I'm going to kill you. At this time, Flesh, who thought he was embarrassed, also came to his senses. He ignored the blood flowing out from the corner of his mouth after being hit, and instead swung his fist and hit Robert in the face. With a sound of bang, Flesh's fist was directly caught, and then in his incredible eyes, Robert used a huge force to bend his hand directly. Flesh let out a heart-rending scream, and those who had jumped up and said they wanted to fight Robert had already stood away. Stop Robert, you're going to break his hand. Blaze hurriedly spoke out. In fact, Robert would have really planned to do this if he hadn't spoken, because he hated Flesh when he was watching Marvel movies in his previous life. Now he just did what he wanted to do. Even if Robert let go, Fresh's hand was eventually twisted to an exaggerated angle, and he finally fell to the ground and still moaned. It's really annoying, can't you just be quiet? With that said, Robert kicked out, directly making this classmate who was always bullying feel the feeling of being bullied, and he mastered the strength just enough to knock him out. Bang! After fainting, the remaining strength in Fleish's head was not gone, and his head hit the corner of the table, and a trace of blood immediately flowed out. Ah! Some timid girls were so frightened that they screamed and covered their eyes with their hands. Obviously this wasn't part of Robert's plan, but he didn't care. Hello everyone, my name is Robert Betty. My life creed is that no one will offend me and I will not offend others. Of course, the idiot who fainted just now did so because he scolded Peter, the first friend I considered myself here. As he glanced around the classroom, he said in a calm tone. So I hope some of you will be smart, or I wouldn't mind asking you to go to the hospital for a few days. When Robert spoke on the stage, the students in the audience, including Teacher Blaze, didn't say anything. It's unclear whether they didn't dare or what the reason was. What happened here? However, this state of affairs disappeared with the intervention of the school security team. 6 or 7 of them filed in, and the presence of these security guards seemed to give the people below the courage to speak. Oh, thank God he was saved. Take a look at Fleisch. I feel like he is dying. It's him, this crazy person, he's the one who beat Fleisch like this. You should catch him quickly. The man originally wanted to call Robert a lunatic, but when he thought of the cruel way he had treated Fleisch just now and looked at his small body, he could only change his words. You'd better send Fleisch to the infirmary first. As he said this, Blaze went to help the person. To be honest, as a teacher, he usually didn't like students like Fleisch very much, but he had no choice but to walk sideways even if his family had money. Today, someone finally showed up to deal with Fleisch, but as a teacher, Blaze did not agree with Robert's approach. He thought it was a bit extreme. Who among you is Master Robert? The middle school security leader asked a question in a confused manner, and Robert frowned upon hearing this title. If you're talking about Robert, I'll give it to you, but if you're talking about young Master, then I'm sorry, I'm not the person you're looking for. The security didn't care about Robert's words. He only needed to determine who Robert was. As for the title, he could be very flexible. So Mr. Robert, how do you think this matter should be handled now? When the security asked this question, everyone at the scene was stunned. They couldn't imagine how the security, who was supposed to punish the bad guys, started to listen to the bad guys. Pull him down and let their parents pick it up. Why do I have to pay for his medical expenses? Ha ha. You were joking. The security guard smiled awkwardly and then lifted up the unconscious Fleisch and walked out the door. Someone even wiped away the blood dripping from him. Jingle bell. The class bell rang again. Even though the scene just now was shocking, Blaze could only continue teaching when there was no notice of class suspension. You actually don't have to do this for me. Fleisch is a man who takes revenge. I think we will be in trouble in the future. As soon as he returned to his previous position under the fearful eyes of everyone, Peter came over and said. As for Robert, he said that his favorable impression of him has greatly increased. After all, not everyone can choose to stand on the seemingly disadvantaged side when things are still unclear. Normal people's thinking should be to distance themselves from the relationship. It's okay, trust me Peter, I never do anything I'm not sure about. Seeing that Robert was so confident, Peter didn't say anything more, but turned around and started studying seriously, and he also carefully discovered that the new friend next to him seemed to not understand how to do some questions. Looking at the sleepy Robert, Peter mustered up the courage and said, "How about I teach you? Anyway, idle time is idle, and Robert happens to be passing the time, so he might as well learn something." With this mentality, Robert starts to study seriously with Peter. Ouch, have you really been to school before? Peter found that he had overestimated Robert before. He originally thought that the other person just didn't understand a little bit, but what he didn't expect was that he didn't understand everything. Well, things seem a bit unexpected, but I think with your talent, things will get better soon. Robert and Peter were concentrating on their studies, while a middle-aged man in the principal's office was furious. Mr. Principal, I want to know what happened to my son Fleisch at school, and why was he beaten seriously? Louis, the principal of Zhongcheng School, was a little confused when faced with such a thing. He did not expect that Robert would beat the famous rich second generation of Zhongcheng like that on his first day here. Originally, he planned to push Robert out and let them solve it on their own, but Principal Lewis thought of what Dean said this morning, and after weighing it, he made a decision. Mr. Henry, I'm sorry for what happened to Fresh, but as far as I know he was the one who caused it first. Not only did Robert's name not be revealed in his words, he was even covering for him and shifting the responsibility to Fresh. Ha ha. Henry laughed angrily at his words. It was their fault that his son was beaten like this. If your attitude is like this, Principal Lewis, then I think I can only solve the problem in my own way. After saying that, Henry laughed angrily. And Lewis was pretending from behind. What do you want to do when you come back? Although he shouted loudly, his buttocks never left the chair from beginning to end, and he just watched people leave. It was not until long after Henry left the principal's office that Lewis breathed a sigh of relief, and thought he had handled the situation well, neither telling Robert nor offending Henry to death. Then it depends on which of you has the bigger fist. Henry. Hey, Henry. Lewis hummed, obviously not optimistic about Henry's business family. Hey, Sherman, my son was beaten at school. The person seems to have a background. Go check it out for me. After Henry walked out of Midtown School, before going to the hospital to see his son's injury, he first called a human detective shop, and Sherman was the owner of this company. Sherman was very willing to serve this Mr. Henry, because the other party gave him a lot of money every time. Sherman, it's a great honor to receive your call again. Mr. Henry, I will investigate this matter as soon as possible. Henry hung up the phone and calmed down when he sat back in his car and asked the driver to drive to the hospital. He couldn't help but start thinking about what to do if the person who injured his son really had a rich background. No matter who the other party is, I can't let my son get hurt in vain. In the end, Henry made up his mind to stand up for his son. From beginning to end, he never considered whether there was a problem with his own education that led to his current ending. In the evening, Henry returned to the company to deal with the things he should have done at noon, but he became furious every time he recalled his son screaming when he woke up. Ding ding ding. The phone rang. Henry looked at it and it was Sherman calling and quickly answered it. Hey, what did you find? Who is the other party? Sherman. Mr. Henry, I have found out the guy who injured your son. He is a boy named Robert Betty. Henry. That's it. I can send someone to Midtown School to ask about these things. I'm paying you to check the other person's background. On the other end of the phone, Sherman looked through the investigation materials sent by his staff. They were all very ordinary, including Robert's family and background, which was no different from ordinary people. Well, according to the information I have received now, Robert's parents were both ordinary workers. They were killed in an accident, and the factory compensated him more than $1 million. That's what I know for the time being, Mr. Henry. There was no way Sherman could make it up on the spot, so he could only tell it based on the investigation report. Henry, does this mean that this Robert is just an ordinary person? Sherman, it looks like this, Mr. Henry. No, if he is an ordinary person, why would the Zongcheng principal protect him? There must be a reason. Go and find out for me. Henry was a little happy when he heard that Robert was an ordinary person, because then he wouldn't have to work hard to deal with this kid. But before he was overjoyed, he thought that the person who could be protected by the principal could be an ordinary person. Henry was very dissatisfied with the fact that he had paid such a high price in exchange for such unclear information and immediately said angrily to Sherman. Sherman, okay, Mr. Sherman. Robert didn't care about these actions against him. He continued to learn high school knowledge from Peter. Because of his good memory, even if he has never learned anything before, he can quickly remember it and then gradually master it. Oh, Robert, you are a genius. Did you know that in 3 days you learned what it would take me a month to master? Really, that must have a lot to do with your good teaching. Peter, thank you, but I think your talent is equally important. Robert laughed it off. Let's go after school. Looking up at his classmates who were almost gone, Robert said to Peter. Oh, good. After realizing it, Peter suddenly stood up and packed his school bag. Slow down, buddy, I'm not rushing you. Robert also started to pack up his things. Hi, my name is Belinda Kate. Robert looked at the girl who suddenly came up to say hello. He had actually noticed her early on. After all, if a person looks back at you several times in a row during class, you can remember her. Aha, hello, can I get to know you? As she said this, she actually blushed with embarrassment, which is rare in the free and open United States. Robert Betty, nice to meet you Belinda. When the girl shows affection for him, Robert is not a stupid person and agrees immediately. In fact, he is now completely open to anyone who comes. Peter, do you need to go back with me today? After saying hello to Belinda, Robert asked Peter and received the same answer as before. Peter, no, I mean let's forget it, we're not on the same path. Okay, Belinda, do you want to come with me? I'll take you home. Robert had obviously expected Peter's answer. He asked this question just out of politeness, and then came the main topic of the day, which he had just thought of. Is this your car? Robert's Audi was parked in the exclusive parking space for school teaching staff, and no one said anything. Well, how about it, not bad. Robert felt an indescribable feeling about Belinda's surprise. Perhaps this was the pleasure of pretending to be inferior in front of the opposite gender, especially when the other person was a beautiful member of the opposite gender. So Belinda, where do you live? Queens, it's a bit dirty. If you think it will be troublesome, you can take me to the subway station nearby. I can go home by myself. Belinda seemed a little embarrassed when she mentioned her address, which made Robert a little confused. Dirty, messy, what does the literal meaning mean? Is there any chaotic place in New York besides Brooklyn? Do you think it's polite to dump a girl in a dangerous place and let her go back alone? Although he didn't know the prestige of Queens, this did not prevent Robert from giving it a dangerous name. However, what he didn't expect was that he was right. Belinda, thank you, Robert. She was still a little embarrassed in the passenger seat, as if she wasn't the one who came to chat with Robert alone in the classroom. Robert didn't care whether Belinda was pretending or not, he didn't care about it anyway. After starting the vehicle, Robert put his right hand into gear. Then for some unknown reason, he subconsciously moved his hand and placed it on his lap. Kindness. Robert was actually ready for the other party to get angry, but what he didn't expect was that Belinda just snorted and said nothing. Glancing at Belinda from the corner of his eye, Robert was a little curious about what this girl wanted from him. Although he was a bit handsome, he was self-aware and did not believe that a beauty like Belinda would fall in love with him for no reason. This kind of thing has been classified as a transaction in Robert's mind, so he became more presumptuous and moved his hand slowly. The main target has left the school and is heading towards 6th Avenue. Just when Robert was doing whatever he wanted to the girl in his car, little did he know that he himself had been targeted. Follow him. Find the right moment and hit me right away. Break one of his legs to let this kid know that there are some people that he can't mess with just by relying on a little background. Yes, the man who was staring at Robert signaled to his friend who was driving in front of him. He started the car and followed Robert from a distance, waiting for the opportunity. And Henry, the boss of this group of people, was sworn to promise his wife and son. Flash, the boy who hit you will be punished immediately. HMPH. He thought he could walk away from school after bribing an official from the Ministry of Education. This kid seems to have forgotten that he is not in school all the time. Thank you, Father. Ah. Because he was so excited, Flash stood up and didn't want to twitch his injured arm. From this, he even remembered Robert's humiliation to him and his embarrassing appearance in front of his classmates. Flash, be careful. His mother saw this and hurriedly helped her. She didn't want her son to be hurt again. Father, I want to see that kid's miserable state in person and take some photos as a souvenir so that I can avenge my shame in front of my classmates. Flash ignored his mother's concern and spoke directly to his rich father. I'm afraid I can't take pictures. That guy does have some background. Although I don't know why he was able to hook up with that official, there is no doubt that this can't be done just by relying on money. Flash didn't hear the underlying meaning of his father's words. Looking at his son who was a little depressed, Henry had to explain himself. What I'm saying is that you can't take pictures of children. It's okay to wear a hood when you go to the scene and take a look at them from a distance. Really, thank you, Father. After listening to Henry's words, Flash instantly regained his excitement. Now he seems to have seen the situation where the great revenge will be avenged. After agreeing to his son, Henry left the room with a smile on his face and called the private detective. Beep. Hello, Mr. Henry. The call was answered instantly. This person was Sherman, the president of the Needle Society. Originally, he was only engaged in detective business, but Henry gave him too much, and Sherman felt that there was no danger in this operation, so he willing to take on work other than research. Where are your positions? My son wants to go over and see with his own eyes what his enemy looks like when he is beaten. Henry's words undoubtedly made Sherman's job more difficult, but when he thought of the $200,000 deposit lying quietly in his account, and the subsequent $500,000 balance payment, Sherman still chose to accept it with all his heart. Okay, Mr. Henry, we are following the target now. The place he is going to is initially judged to be in Queens. I think Master Fresh needs to hurry up, because after arriving in Queens, it will be the perfect time to take action. You all have to wait. After leaving only these words, Henry returned to the house again and said to his son who was getting dressed, "You don't have to be in such a hurry, they will wait for you to appear before starting the performance." In front of his son, Henry has always been a loving father, even a little doting. Humph, this old thing. Sherman, who was following Robert in the car, threw the phone aside. He swore that if it weren't for the hundreds of thousands of dollars, he would have stopped serving him. It's okay to be angry, but Sherman must unconditionally implement the boss's request, unless he has trouble with money. What you need to know is that there are not many such people in the United States, and of course Sherman is not one of them. Notify me, and if the time comes, I will rush over and control the target. Don't move until I give you an order. Through the walkie-talkie, Sherman notified the brothers who were changing cars behind him, lest they do anything without permission and ruin his plan. Robert, who was driving in front, was completely unaware that someone was following him from behind. He was too busy thinking about it now and had no time to do it. In fact, even if he found out that he was being followed, he would not be afraid at all. After all, the German Nazis could not scare him, let alone the little gangsters who dance happily in peacetime. Putting his hand on the lap of Belina, the passenger, Robert saw that she had no reaction for a long time and realized that this girl's purpose might not be simple. GG. There was a sound of brakes, and Robert drifted into a passing alley. Being quite self-aware, he would not think that Belinda allowed him to do what she did just because he was handsome. Although he looks a little handsome when he looks in the mirror, he is definitely not so handsome that a pretty girl would throw him into his arms as soon as he met him. Did the target find anything? You follow car number 2 and take a look. Sherman, who was following Robert, obviously couldn't understand his sudden move into the alley. The only explanation now was that he should have discovered something. I don't know if Boss Target found anything, but I think it doesn't matter anymore. What he drove into was a dead end. The voice of the number 2 driver's subordinate sounded on the intercom. Sherman still didn't know what Robert wanted to do, but now he was not panicking at all. Keep an eye on him, and we'll take action when Master Flesh comes. Since the other party went to his own death and saved Sherman a lot of trouble, the only thing he had to do now was just to watch Robert and wait for the two audiences, Henry and Flesh, to come before he could start performing. Mr. Henry, the area I am currently in is the 7th Avenue of the Queens District. The target has been controlled by us in an alley. Now we are waiting for you and the young master. Do you need me to pick you up? No, my driver can find the way. Henry just replied to Sherman's words and hung up the phone. Sherman, who was already somewhat immune to the arrogance of rich people, was not angry about it this time. In the alley between two residential buildings, Robert looked directly into Belinda's eyes and asked directly, "What do you want to do?" Well, suddenly, just after Robert finished asking, a man with fragrant lips came up to him, and then, with his reaction, he could have avoided it, but for some reason, his reaction was half a beat too slow and she succeeded. Call. Robert, who was successfully aroused, began to ignore it, but what awaited him was destined to be a just trial. Because not long after, he touched a bright red color in the car, and where it came from. How much do you want? Squeak. There was a sharp braking sound, and then an old man and a young man got out of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The young man among them had a hand tied around his neck with a bandage. Sherman has been waiting here for nearly an hour, but he did not dare to complain in front of the boss. Instead, he ran over as soon as he saw the boss's people. Mr. Henry, you are here, that kid is in that alley, we blocked him. As he spoke, he pointed in the direction of Robert and the others and said as if asking for credit. Well, you did a good job, but what if the other party calls the police? From a distance, Henry could clearly see the Audi in the alley, which was exactly the same as the one Robert drove on the second day of school in the intelligence. He was originally quite satisfied with Sherman's ability to do this, but suddenly he thought of the police. You know, even though this is Queens and it's dark, that doesn't mean the police won't come in and save a guy with a strong background. Don't worry, Mr. Henry, we have already prepared. If you don't believe me, please take out your phone and take a look. Henry took out his mobile phone. When he saw that there was not even a signal, he guessed that it was Sherman's fault. He was really satisfied this time. Well done, I will consider giving you a little extra tip on top of the original amount when I get back. Thank you, Mr. Henry. Henry's words made Sherman's complaints about him disappear instantly. After all, there was nothing that money couldn't solve. Since his employer was so generous, Sherman didn't want to hide anymore. He said, "Action," on the intercom and then made a gesture of invitation, signaling the boss Henry and his son Fresh to have a great viewing. Location. I can't do it anymore, please let me go, Belinda's voice begging for mercy could be heard in the Audi, but Robert, who seemed not to be satisfied yet, did not intend to stop his conquest because in his feeling, the girl beneath him should still have some energy left, even though she had already come 3 times. Dong dong dong. When Robert pulled out his dick and was about to do it again, his driver's window was knocked hard several times, and cracks were visible to the naked eye. What are you doing in there? You're not shaking with fear, right? When I came here, I saw the car was shaking, ha ha ha, Bang. The big man originally wanted to intimidate Robert before breaking the glass, but he never expected that a fist from the driver's seat suddenly smashed the window and knocked him away. Instead, he was the one who was frightened. Mr. Henry, believe me, this operation will end quickly. As soon as Sherman finished his boastful words, he was severely slapped in the face by reality, because he saw his capable men being beaten away. This is what you call quick. Let Robert escape quickly, right? Before Henry could speak this time, Flesh spoke first. Obviously he was not satisfied with the current result. What my son said is exactly what I want to say, Sherman, if you can't let us see what we want to see, then I don't think the subsequent balance payment will be settled, and you will have to refund the deposit. This is, do you remember the rules we made before? Seeing that his son was dissatisfied, Henry directly blamed Sherman, and even took out his Achilles heel. Remember, I still remember, Mr. Henry, I will let someone perform for you what you and the young master want to see. Henry's words were obviously very effective. Sherman no longer dared to have any reservations. Instead, he directly sent his remaining 8 men to deal with Robert. As if to end it quickly, Henry's own driver and bodyguard also participated in the attack on Robert. Belinda was put back on the co-pilot by Robert. After simply putting some clothes on her, Robert put on his coat and trousers and went out to solve the problem. As for why Belinda was not allowed to put on her own clothes, because an unconscious person it is difficult for people to do this. Robert closed the car door with a pen sound and looked at the 9 people walking towards him, feeling quite irritable. Where did you get those stinky fish and shrimps from? Robert looked at the 9 people walking over. They all had weapons in their hands, and they obviously didn't have good intentions. HMPH. Boy, you'll know who you are when you lie on the ground for a while. This kid doesn't seem to realize the seriousness of the problem, so let me teach him how to behave. These men were obviously extremely angry at what Robert said after getting out of the car, so they charged at him brandishing their weapons. Robert, who had no time to play with these people, transformed into Superman and punched 9 people at once, without even using it for 10 seconds. These are your men, Mr. Henry. The first think we need to keep it down. I saw with my own eyes that my men were eliminated instantly. Now they are lying on the ground or hanging on the wall. Although they don't know whether they are dead or alive, they definitely have no fighting ability. Sherman's years of experience in seeing such horrific scenes told him that escaping now was the best choice, but he didn't expect that Henry, who saw the failure of the action, suddenly roared. Why keep your voice down? Can the little fool over there rush up and beat me? Obviously, years of training in the company had made him forget many things. Now Henry only saw the disappointed look in his son's eyes, and the scene that seemed to be his own embarrassment. "Who are you calling a fool?" With a pop, Henry was slapped and flew away, and his face quickly began to swell. "Don't hit me, I'm innocent, Sherman wanted to explain something to Robert, but he just ignored him and punched him unconscious. In fact, Robert had been watching for a while, and he had already figured out the relationship between these people. The person who was knocked unconscious was just a shrimp hired by Fresh's father. "How dare you hit my father, I will fight with you." At this time, Flesh, who had reacted, rushed towards Robert angrily and hit him on the back with his only hand. No, Henry seemed to realize a lot after his face was swollen. He wanted to stop his son's impulse, but everything seemed to be too late. Fresh was kicked away by Robert, and he didn't even bother to turn around during the whole process. "Fresh, what did you do, you fool?" Seeing his precious son being kicked unconscious again, Henry, who had just regained his senses, was once again dominated by anger. He roared at Robert crazily, spittle flying everywhere. "Tisk, tisk, tisk, you don't seem to realize the seriousness of the matter. Mr. Henry, I think that's your name. I must have heard it correctly just now." While talking, Robert groped around the unconscious Sherman until he found something on him, a pistol. Click. Robert opened the gun safety skillfully, and after confirming that the bullet was correct, Robert pointed the gun at Henry. "So now do you understand the situation? Gudong." The dark muzzle of the gun was pointed at him, and Henry even felt that he could see clearly the appearance of the barrel for a moment, and there was a golden bullet in it. "I don't believe you dare to drive." Henry obviously wanted to be tough for a while, but Robert didn't want to waste time with him, so he shot Fresh directly behind him in the right leg. Fresh, who was in a coma, was awakened directly by severe pain, and then passed out from the pain. "No, don't. I understand the situation, sir. Please let my son go and call the ambulance, otherwise he will die." It must be said that Henry is a father who loves his son very much. He was still so tough when he was pointed at a gun, but he immediately surrendered as soon as his son was beaten. "Henry, I also want to help you, but your people just broke my car window. What do you think we should do about this?" There is no doubt that Robert found a business opportunity in this matter, a good way to make money. "Money. I will give you money and you will save my son. Is 10 million enough?" Henry had completely given up his dignity at this moment and knelt on the ground begging Robert to agree to his conditions. "Not enough. What about 30 million, 50 million? 100 million? Seeing the conditions offered, Robert kept shaking his head, and in the end he was obviously a little impatient and had already raised his gun towards Fresh again. Henry quickly gave the highest conditions, which was also the most liquidity his company could use now. "Deal, Mr. Henry." Finally, when he said 100 million, Robert was satisfied. He put down the gun and took out his cell phone to make an emergency call. "Sorry, your location is not on the server. Please go to a place with signal and redial." Although Robert agreed to Henry's conditions, it seemed that some people or things did not agree, such as mobile phones or signals. "It seems I can't help, but what we were talking about just now was about repairing car windows. Obviously you still have to transfer the 100 million to me." Robert, who still didn't know the reason for the lack of signal, subconsciously thought that the signal was simply bad. He originally planned to give up on helping others and focus his main energy on compensation matters. "This fool," Henry cursed in his mind. It was obvious that Robert was planning to buy and sell by force. How could a piece of glass worth $100 million be justified? He is the guy who blocked the signal. He must know how to turn off the blocking machine. Cursing in his heart, Henry still did not forget his son's safety. He quickly asked Robert to wake up Sherman. "This is not a 100 million project, we need to add money." Facing Robert's offer, Henry could only break his teeth and swallow, and nodded awkwardly. The familiar gunshot sounded again, and this time it was Sherman who was hit on the ground. His palm was pierced by a bullet and the pain made him wake up from his coma. Hey, stop barking. Where is the machine that blocks the signal?" Sherman's shouting stopped. It wasn't that the pain was gone, but that Robert directly pressed the muzzle of the gun against his forehead. The fear of death made him stop crying. "On, that car, it's the third machine on the left, just turn off the red power. Intermittently, Sherman forced himself to tell the location of the signal blocker. Robert was very tolerant of a man who had been shot in the hand, and waited until he finished speaking before turning off the machine. Robert walked leisurely to the car and turned off the machine, while Henry on the side witnessed what he had done. He couldn't help but feel tragic that his son had provoked such a devil. How could anyone ask someone to shoot his hand with a gun? This is a murderous devil. Henry finally came to a conclusion, and stood up tremblingly and came to his son's side. Looking at the bleeding wound, he quickly blocked it with something. Would you like to call the emergency center? This is Queens, there is someone who is dying, please come as soon as possible. After turning off the machine, Robert walked up to Henry and called the emergency center in front of him, and hung up the whole process. Okay, I've fulfilled your conditions, please give me the money. Putting the phone back in his pocket, Robert reached out directly to Henry and asked for money. Actually, you should be more solemn when you made the emergency call, otherwise they might think you were joking. Why don't you call again? Robert remained unmoved when faced with Henry's words. Only the hand holding the pistol moved. Okay, I'll shut up, but you have to call me if you want money, right? Only in this way can I transfer the money. Robert compromised on the money issue and gave Henry his cell phone, but before that he warned Henry because he was afraid of his tricks. If my $110 million has not arrived after the ambulance arrives, I don't mind letting you see your son get shot in the head. Henry finally had a look of fear, as if his thoughts had been exposed. Between money, his son and his own safety, Henry chose the latter, his son and his own life. Hey, I'm Henry, the execution password is 6981. Now I need 70 million, transfer it to me immediately, the card number is 10,928,391. Henry recited the bank card number that Robert had only told him 3 times. To be honest, he didn't even know how he did it. He could only confirm that people can stimulate their potential at the critical moment of life and death. Henry's company's liquidity is only 70 million, and the rest are fixed assets. As for the remaining 40 million whole of 110 million, it can only be paid out from his own private account. Mr. Robert, can I call an emergency number for myself? My phone is not broken like Mr. Henry's. How can that work? Now it costs 10 million to make an emergency call, and you have to be like Mr. Henry. Sherman was the leader of the group that attacked Robert. He had never been merciful to such people. But, I only have 1.2 million, sir. Sherman endured the pain in his palms and said to Robert. His eyes were already filled with tears, and that look seemed to be to win Robert's pity. When you let people attack me, your ending was destined to be tragic. 1.5 million, and Mr. Henry will pay you the rest. This is the most generous offer I can give you. Robert's words reached the ears of Henry, who was busy transferring money at the side, and he almost spit out a mouthful of blood. Did you hear that, Henry? I have a favor worth 8.5 million for you. It's the kind of favor that you have to do, you know what I mean. Henry, I understand. Now he gritted his teeth, but he had no choice but to get angry. After being angry, Henry had to change the transfer amount obediently. In order to sacrifice his life, Sherman had no choice but to transfer money to the account Robert mentioned. That was his urgent need for most of his life, and it was gone all of a sudden. How could I be so stupid as to get involved in this? While transferring the money, Sherman cursed himself in his mind. Now he regretted helping Henry very much. If he had known earlier, he might have gone far away now. Ding. The transfer has received 70 million US dollars. Ding. The transfer amounted to 48.5 million United States dollars. Ding. 1.5 million US dollars has been transferred. Robert took the phone and looked at his account balance, which was 140 million United States dollars. Well, that's right. Then if Mr. Henry is fine, I will leave. Unexpectedly, he would be able to earn money again. Robert nodded with satisfaction, and then asked Henry with a friendly look on his face. No, it's okay. Henry really wanted to slap himself now. He secretly hated letting others attack him rashly when he didn't understand the strength and ferocity of his opponent. If he had known earlier, he would have at least hired a professional killer. Although it was expensive, the price would definitely not exceed 100 million. What happened outside? Robert sat back in the car. At this time, Belinda had calmed down and got dressed. She sat in the passenger seat and asked Robert, "Well, I'm a big customer who gave me money when I have nothing to do. By the way, you don't mind if I call?" "Do not mind." In fact, Robert didn't care about her thoughts at all and had already dialed the phone before Belinda spoke. "Hello, Uncle Robert." In the Air Force Base, Dean rubbed his temples with a headache. He was in a meeting just now, but he didn't expect Robert to call. "Well, Dean, I'm sorry to trouble you again. Maybe you can provide me with the contact information of someone who can solve the problem." After waving his hands to disperse the soldiers, Dean said into the phone, "Can you tell me the specific situation?" So Robert immediately told the story of his conflict with Flesh and how his father Henry later came to seek revenge. He listened quietly to the end. Although Dean didn't agree with Robert's hurtful behavior because of others' ridicule, as a junior, he felt that he couldn't say much. Mike Ross, Uncle Robert is the Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Police Department. I think he can help you solve the problem very well. Although he disagreed with Robert's previous actions, Henry was even more disgusted by sending people to attack Robert Dean without going through legal procedures, so he immediately told Robert the person who could solve the problem. "Okay, just send me his phone number, and then you can go about your business." Robert felt a little embarrassed when he thought about how often he troubled others. "It's okay. Did this happen to you in Queens?" "Kindness. Let me contact Mike first this time. By the way, if you run into trouble again, just call him directly." "Okay, thanks Dean." After hanging up the phone, Robert started the car again. Although he didn't turn on the speakerphone when talking to Dean just now, he didn't avoid it. Robert didn't know how much Belinda heard next to her, but he didn't care. "Then what are your conditions?" "Belinda, that's your name, right?" While talking, Robert put his hand on Belinda's leg again. In fact, he was not fully enjoying it just now, but now that the car window is broken and there is no private message at all, Robert is not interested anymore. But some small actions are still indispensable. Belinda groaned out of discomfort or comfort, and then she revealed her conditions when Robert tightened his grip. "Can you lend me $100,000? Reason." Robert, who was driving, subconsciously retracted his mischievous hand after hearing this condition. It is said that if he hadn't made a lot of money just now, he might have refused directly after hearing the condition of $100,000. "My mother has leukemia and now she urgently needs this money." Belinda bit her lower lip and looked at Robert pitifully. Originally, when her mother was sick and her father did nothing, she was ready to drop out of school and go to the bar to make so-called quick money, but Robert's appearance made her think again. A glimmer of hope arose. Because classmates said that Robert dared to hit the rich second-generation Flesh and nothing happened after that, which only proves that he is richer than Flesh. Originally he was thinking of seeing if he could bargain with the price, but the reasons Belinda gave made him not know how to refuse, and it was also his first time. When Robert's eyes met Belinda's blue eyes, the faint crystal mist defeated him. Okay, what's your card number?" Ding, the transfer was successful. The balance is reduced by 100,000 United States dollars. Taking money out of his account for the first time, Robert couldn't help but feel a little melancholy for a moment. "We're here, get off the car. Today, just pretend that nothing happened to us, understand?" Belinda opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she was speechless. After saying yes to Robert, she got out of the car in a daze. Even though her body hurt, she limped to the door of her house without caring. Robert was sitting in the car and saw the girl's movements, but he didn't know why he didn't get out of the car to help her, but planned to leave after seeing her walk away. "I will pay you back." Before Robert could drive very far, Belinda suddenly shouted from behind. After returning home, Robert skillfully opened the stock software and checked Stark's stock. It was 381 United States dollars per share. The stock price had more than halved in just 3 days. I have to say that after losing Tony Stark, Stark Company has completely lost its soul, and everyone seems to be starting to look down on him. It's almost time to end tomorrow. Looking at the gradually flattening stock price trend, Robert estimated that the bottom has almost reached the bottom. After all, A skinny camel is bigger than a horse, and Stark Company still has a lot of business that can sustain them for a long time. Washington. As Robert fell into a deep sleep, a conversation about him was unfolding. Father, did Uncle Robert go too far this time? Dean was hurriedly summoned home by Burns. He immediately began to complain instead of listening to what his father wanted to do, saying that he, an Air Force colonel, had almost become someone's personal secretary. Just this time, I actually don't agree with Uncle Robert's approach. And after talking about what Robert did today and the causes and consequences he learned, Dean expressed his own evaluation of the matter. Well, are you finished? Burns seemed a little sleepy. He almost fell asleep when his son was talking. He didn't react until his son's voice stopped. Father. Dean looked at his father in front of him speechlessly. For the first time, he felt that this once all-powerful old man was really old and confused, and started to completely shield someone because of an old relationship. I know you have a lot of doubts, but before that you might as well take a look at this. As he spoke, Burns handed a letter of appointment to Dean. He picked it up and looked at it carefully and found that Robert was appointed colonel. Even though he was a little surprised, Dean was still a little confused. He looked at Burns. Is it because of this? But father, I am also a colonel. Looking at the son who looked up with pride in front of him, Burns sometimes hid this pride because of his strict education when he was a child, but Burns knew that his son had always been excellent. Kid, sometimes you have to look at the whole picture. After speaking, Freeman pointed to the name of the person at the top of the nomination list for the commission, followed by his military rank, 5-star general. Marshal Phillip once said in public that he would not have the chance to be a marshal without Robert, so if Robert were still alive, he would definitely make him a general. Dean was shocked by his father's words. He knew Marshal Phillip, but had never heard of him saying these words. Seeing that his son understood something, Burns continued to make some points. It is known that Admiral Freeman listens very much to his father, Marshal Phillip, and this is just a layer of Robert's background. What he really relies on is his unparalleled strength. Even if you haven't seen it with your own eyes, you should know something about it from other people's mouths. Don't have even the slightest doubt about this, that's someone who was once called a demigod. That night, Dean walked out of his father's room. After tonight, he understood many problems that he had never figured out before. Picking up the letter of appointment in hand, it is stamped with the seals of the Pentagon and the President, which represents authority in the United States. Although only the military rank did not specify which army he could command, Dean had no doubt that with Robert's profound background, he could immediately obtain the command of a division if he wanted to. Looks like I have to go there in person tomorrow morning. After his father's explanation, Dean changed his attitude towards Robert. He may not have noticed it himself, but in fact, he had begun to hate Robert in his heart before, but after this conversation, this emotion disappeared quietly. At the same time, something related to Robert is happening in New York. Boss, our factory was sealed by the government. They said we had dangerous goods. In the VIP ward of the hospital, Henry continued to receive bad news one after another. First, their products were suddenly inspected on a large scale. As a result, problems were discovered and they were asked to be removed from the shelves and stopped being sold. Henry made countless phone calls to officials he had befriended and even state legislators among them. At first, they seemed unaware of the matter, and some even said they would help him. Not long after hanging up these calls and dealing with the issue of product suspension and forced removal from shelves, Henry received another call from the company's finance, saying that the tax bureau suddenly came to the company to audit the accounts. Henry didn't know how dirty his hands were, so this time he was even more panicked and made another phone call. Those people who just said they would help him solve the problem obviously came to their senses when they heard that something happened to him again. So vague. Then Henry received the news that one factory after another was closed down. A total of 5 factories in his family were closed down. This was obviously not a coincidence. Thinking of the previous series of things, Henry knew that he had offended someone. Looking back, it seemed that only one person among the people I had provoked in the past few days was suspected. Hello, Mr. Congressman, I'm Henry. Sorry, the person you are calling has hung up. Henry shamelessly called for the 3rd time, but was hung up on without even giving him time to finish his sentence. A feeling of powerlessness emerged in his heart. Henry didn't know how long it had been since he had experienced this feeling of powerlessness, but today he felt again that the reason for everything was that he had offended a giant. A behemoth that he still doesn't know who he is. You still want to sleep. It happened that Henry saw his son sleeping in the bed next door when he was angry. For the first time, he felt disgusted with him. When he thought about who caused Robert, he suddenly became angry. Snapped. The brand new mobile phone hit Flesh accurately on the face. The pain made him wake up. When he saw the person who hit him clearly, he was in disbelief and asked with a little grievance. "Father, what are you doing?" "Henry, why did you hit your son? His leg is still injured." Henry's fall directly caused his son and wife to look at him, but Henry, who felt that he had lost everything, didn't bother to care about it. "It's your precious son. He insists on messing with that fool. Robert, now we can't afford to mess with him at all. They just sent people to close my company and prepare to sleep on the street from now on." Henry almost roared after finishing the call. His face turned red and he was already on the verge of losing his mind. What should we do then? How about letting Flesh go apologize to him and let our family go?" Fresh's mother, who had just felt sorry for her son, now heard that she could no longer live a luxurious life. She no longer cared about her son, and instead sought medical attention due to his illness. "Yes, what a good idea. Let's go apologize and leave Flesh." As if a drowning man was grabbing the last straw, Henry jumped up and quickly got out of bed. Then he didn't even bother to put on his shoes and just tried to pull his son who was shot in the leg and got up to apologize to Robert Penn. However, everything he did seemed so ridiculous after the person who suddenly knocked on the door and broke in appeared. "Mr. Henry, you are suspected of more than 10 charges including manufacturing, harboring, dangerous goods, tax evasion, kidnapping and extortion. Please come with us. You and your family are also suspected of concealment." Ha ha, ha ha ha. After these people rushed out and finished speaking, Henry knew that he had lost all hope, and immediately he sat on the ground and laughed as if he had gone crazy. There was a heavy rain in New York that night. After the rain, it seemed that all the unbearable things were washed away and ushered in a new and better day. Of course, this is for those who have tomorrow. Some people are destined to never see the rising sun of a new day. They can only watch the setting sun while watching the wind in prison. Jingle bell. The alarm sounded and Robert got up on time. After brushing his teeth and washing his face, he opened the curtains and enjoyed the warm morning sun. Beep. The doorbell rang, and Robert, who was about to go out, opened the door and found that the person coming was Dean. "Well, you came at the right time. If you had come a few minutes later, I would have been out." "Dean, looks like I'm lucky today. I'm good at sharing, so Uncle Robert, look what I brought you." Robert didn't rush to go to school because of Dean's arrival. The reason why he went out so late today was because his car was taken to have the glass replaced last night. He probably wouldn't arrive until noon, and he had to squeeze in during this time. Subway. However, Dean's arrival obviously solved this problem perfectly. Robert did not believe that this always smart junior would come without driving. "Oh, let me see what good luck you brought me." Taking a bag from Dean's hand, he opened it enthusiastically. He originally thought it was a bank check, but when he saw the contents inside, his face fell. "What, Colonel Dean, if I remember correctly, I haven't done anything lately. If I have to say one thing, I just killed a capitalist who exploited the people last night. If I can be promoted to colonel because of this, I think it is too childish. Take it back quickly and let's not start this kind of thing. Joke." With that said, Robert returned the bag containing the letter of appointment to Dean, seeming to avoid it. "Isn't this a good thing, Uncle Robert? Why do you?" Dean felt very incomprehensible to Robert's behavior. You must know that a colonel is a height that many people struggle to reach even in their lifetime. However, even though this military rank is coveted by many people, Robert does not care or even refuses. "Dean, you have to know that pie in the sky doesn't fall into the sky. Take it away and thank Burns for me, but tell him I'm not interested." "Uncle Robert, I think you misunderstood. This matter was not brought up by my father, but by General Freeman. He is the successor of Marshal Phillip." As if he was afraid that Robert, a man who had been sleeping for 70 years, would not understand the history that everyone knew. Dean added the last sentence as a special reminder. Marshal Philip, Admiral Freeman. Robert read these two names and their military ranks. He felt what was wrong with the world. Could it be that just any cat could be a marshal or general? Yes, Uncle Robert, and this is an appointment personally sealed by the Pentagon and Mr. President, and it has been effective since yesterday. It seemed that in order to make Robert accept the reality better and stop struggling fearlessly, Dean once again took the last hit. At the same time, in order to comfort Robert, he even revealed his record in World War II. Okay, why don't I accept this appointment? Seeing that Dean's words were getting more and more outrageous, and even described Robert as a super-terrestrial god of war, in order to prevent himself from being embarrassed for a while, Robert hurriedly stopped him from continuing, but he was not completely unconditional. I know that accepting an appointment also means taking on more responsibilities, but one thing I need to make clear is that I cannot be forced to do anything, and all actions must be of my own free will. I can't make the decision. Why don't you let me go back and ask my father? Dean also had difficulty with Robert's request, and he had no power to make decisions, so he had no choice but to ask his father Burns to make his decision. No need, I just called Burns. The only thing you need to do now is to send me to school, and then go back to your place of work. Don't do this kind of errands all the time. Patting Dean on the shoulder, Robert motioned for him to drive while he dialed Burns' phone number. Hello, good Burns. It's really good to hear your voice again. It proves that you haven't died of old age or something. If I were in front of you, I might consider using a toilet brush to brush your crow's mouth so that what you say in the future will sound as nice as possible. Burns pretended to be angry. Whatever you want, you can't beat me anyway, ha ha ha. However, Robert looked like a coward on the other end of the phone, as if he was not afraid of anything. In fact, he really was not afraid of anything. Ha ha, you are just relying on the fact that you are not old yet, let's try it when you are young. Burns can be said to be a model of saving face, and this time Robert decided to give his old friend some face. He did not refute, but turned to the topic. I want full autonomy, otherwise this colonel will be taken by whomever he likes. The topic entered a serious stage, and Burns also stopped joking and said solemnly. You are Soldier Robert. Do you remember the oath you swore? Yes, I think, if the President of the United States 70 years ago could stand in front of me, I think I would continue to fulfill my oath. Burns on the other end of the phone was silent for a while, obviously helpless that Robert looked like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water. You have absolute autonomy except for major matters. This is the biggest concession I think they can make. Burns was too lazy to argue with Robert anymore. He told him the truth directly. As for whether Robert agreed or not, it was not his business. Anyway, it was not him who asked him to become a colonel. Hey, it's really troublesome. Okay, thank you Burns. If I can help you with anything in the future, just give me a call. Knowing that his old friend would not deceive him, he said that this was the bottom line for those people, that was the bottom line. Robert, who did not want to have too much contact with those people, simply agreed to the conditions. Of course, he will not forget Burns' help and kindness. In fact, he has been relying on this old friend since he woke up, so he is not stingy with his commitment. Your words are enough. Then when Dean or I encounter trouble that cannot be solved, I will ask you to take action. If someone else had told Burns that they would come to him when they were in trouble, Burns might be kind enough to find a good mental hospital for him and give him a good treatment. But what Robert said is still important to Burns now. There is no way that the invincible impression that Robert once had on him or the people of his time was too deep. I hope your contact information will be of use this time, so that when something really happens, you won't be able to find me like you did 70 years ago. Robert's promise was important, but Burns still did not forget to say angrily at the end of the call. This may be the resentment towards Robert's disappearance for 70 years. Haha, I promise the same situation won't happen again this time, for sure. Burns let him go only after Robert's assurance. Hope so. After the call ended, Robert looked out the window and saw the gate of Midtown High School in the distance. Okay, Dean, go back. Your father and I have negotiated the terms. You can go and defend the country with peace of mind. Okay, Uncle Robert, I hope you have a good mood today. Ignoring Robert's semi-ridiculous words, Dean left directly. Okay students, turn to page 19. By the time Robert came to the class unhurriedly, it had already been in class for more than 20 minutes, but whether it was the supervisor who was patrolling the late students on the road or the math teacher Blaze on the podium, they all seemed to have colluded. Never mind Robert's tardiness. Hey Peter, where were we? Robert naturally put the desks together with Peter, and he suddenly changed the layout of the classroom where everyone sat alone, but Blaze could only pretend not to notice. Just because the principal held an impromptu meeting this morning, the entire 20-minute meeting, which was attended by all the teachers and administrators in the school, was actually about Robert. The reason for all this was that the well-informed principal of Zongcheng learned that Henry's business family had been overturned overnight without causing any disturbance, which gave him a complete idea of how to take sides. And if he wants to move his butt upward, he may have to rely on his performance in front of Robert in the past 2 years, so at the end of the meeting, Principal Zongcheng emphasized. Principal, in a word, Robert Betty cannot offend anyone. Anyone who dares to disobey orders will be expelled. Intimidated by the principal's power, the teachers who were originally a little wary of Robert, a student who could hurt others in public without causing any trouble, could only turn a blind eye to him now. There are no new lessons today, they are all review content, but Teacher Blaze announced something this morning that I thought you might be interested in. What? Robert looked puzzled, because he really couldn't think of anything that would interest him. Tomorrow, the school has organized a study tour to the Columbia University Academy of Sciences. Peter seemed a little excited. Perhaps for a high school student like him, being able to visit a top university is a very happy thing. However, Robert was not interested in this. Looking at Belinda in front of her, although she was doing it covertly, her little moves still caught his eye. Hey, my scumbag classmate in my previous life was right. Never fall in love with a classmate, especially when the semester is still long. It would be fine if they can always be harmonious, but if the relationship breaks down, it will be embarrassing no matter how you look up and disappear after the breakup. Besides, Robert hasn't fallen in love yet, but let's study instead of boring topics. Peter, okay. Peter saw that Robert didn't seem to be interested in this kind of thing, so he didn't mention it again and continued to start the teaching mode. Basically, the teacher talks about it while he learns it below, and then explains some basic knowledge to Robert so that he can understand it. Fortunately, Robert has a good memory, otherwise he would not be able to remember it at all. The morning's study time passed quickly. Blaze on the podium told Robert alone about his visit to Columbus University tomorrow and announced that the get-out of class was over. Mary, have you and Fresh broken up? I heard this morning that people from the police station came to handle his withdrawal from school. As he spoke, he glanced at Robert who was waiting for Peter to clean up behind him with some fear, and he whispered to Mary. I guess this incident may have something to do with this new classmate. Otherwise, why didn't anything happen before? Shish. Mary quickly looked behind her and found that Robert was not paying attention. Then she looked at her best friend helplessly. What can I do? Now that I can't even see anyone else, it should be considered a separation. Forget it, let's go to dinner without talking about this topic. Robert stood behind and leaned against the wall. He had been waiting for Peter. The boy only came back to his senses after Mary left. I've packed up, let's go. Robert, if she is here all the time, do you still have to clean up for a while? No. Nothing. Peter blushed at Robert's words and ran to the cafeteria as if running away. What would you like to order, young man? My casual aunt. Peter was flattered and answered the questions from the cafeteria aunt. You must know that in the past, when he ate, his aunt would tell him what to eat. If he dared to be picky, he would not be able to eat it. But since I met Robert, everything seems to have changed. Not only can you choose dishes for free in the cafeteria, but the people around you have also become kinder. I'm fine too. Robert handed the plate to the canteen. He liked the atmosphere of the canteen very much because the people he met were very polite, and the aunt's hands didn't shake. Enough, auntie, if you take more, I won't be able to finish it. Not only did his hands not shake, but the food he gave was quite solid. He had no doubt that this was enough for 2 meals for some people. After arriving at an unoccupied dining table with Peter, Robert began to eat away the pile of food in front of him, but Peter didn't eat much. What's wrong? Is it not to your liking? I feel pretty good. Robert also noticed Peter's movements. He had eaten a little fast just now and didn't notice the taste of the food. At that moment, he picked up the chicken leg on the plate and took a bite. He tasted it carefully before giving an evaluation. No, it's not unpalatable. In fact, it's more delicious than the canteen food I've had before. Maybe only my aunt's cooking can compare to it. After wiping his mouth with a tissue on the dining table, Robert realized that Peter might have questions to ask. Are we enjoying special treatment? Is this a result of your status? Maybe young people are always full of curiosity. If they don't know something, they will eagerly want to know it. Sometimes they are so curious that they can't eat well. Identity, maybe. Regarding Peter's question, Robert did not answer him directly but gave a perfunctory answer. Because he felt that it was better for Peter not to know in advance, because the time was not yet mature. This was just a small episode and did not affect the relationship between the two. After eating, they returned to the classroom for a lunch break and waited for the afternoon class. What class does Peter have in the afternoon? Don't tell me it's another boring grammar class. Robert was a little sleepy lying on the table, but he still wanted to know about the afternoon class before falling asleep. Let me see. Oh, there's no grammar class, it's just 2 history of the United States classes and an outdoor class. That thing is even more boring. Forget it, I'll just go to the outdoor class for a while. Robert said it very tactfully, mainly because he could not blatantly ridicule Peter because of his patriotic feelings when he became Spider-Man and became an American hero. In fact, what Robert originally wanted to say was that the history of the United States in those few years could be written into a book, and its pages would not even be enough to use as toilet paper for a month. Of course, this kind of thing should never be said in front of a Native American, otherwise it would be looking for discomfort. Robert, I think the history of the United States is worth learning. Don't you think it is a great achievement to liberate black people and make everyone equal? However, even if Robert said that he was not interested in American history, Peter would refute it and try to convince him with something. Right, Robert didn't bother to argue with what Peter wanted to prove. After all, he was only talking about a few years of history and hadn't talked about other things. Peter couldn't stand it and wanted to argue with him. It can be imagined that he was patriotic. To ridicule his country in front of such a patriotic young man, unless Robert no longer wanted to be friends with him, he could never argue about this matter. Peter, I have to take a nap first. Remember to wake me up before class. Otherwise, it won't look good on both my and the teacher's faces when we leave the classroom after class. Changing the topic directly, Robert used sleep escape to directly block Peter's subsequent words. Opening his mouth and looking at Robert, who seemed to be asleep, Peter Parker could only give up. The class bell rang, and Robert had already left the classroom. Now he was sitting in the shade of the playground with a popsicle in his mouth, looking at his phone from time to time. When he skipped class, he didn't just go out to eat popsicles. He had more important things to do, such as waiting for the Audi car to be repaired. Hello, is this Mr. Robert? The phone rang on time, and Robert, who had been staring at the phone for a long time, picked it up and answered it instantly. Well, I am you here. Yes, Mr. Robert, we are at the gate of Zongcheng High School now. Do you want us to drive in or? Robert looked at the time and felt that it wouldn't be much fun to be on the playground. He didn't even take 2 steps from the playground to the school gate before he decided to go out to get his car and leave the school to see what fun things were outside. Then let me come out and get it. 5 minutes after hanging up the phone, Robert arrived at the school gate. As a public school, Zongcheng High School's management is still very strict. You cannot leave the school before school unless under special circumstances. But Robert is obviously the kind of person who has special circumstances all over his body. The school security team not only did not stop him from leaving school early, but even opened the door for him, as if this was his home. He wanted to come and leave. Just go. Power can really corrupt a person. The little privilege he just had when he walked out of school made him feel proud and complacent. To be honest, this feeling was good, but it still felt a bit uninteresting. Robert, your car has been delivered, please confirm. After leaving the school gate, two people got off the transport vehicle that had been waiting for them. One of them was probably the driver. After getting off the bus, he went straight to the Audi car that was fixed on the transport vehicle and moved it off. The other one took a receipt form and asked Robert to sign for it. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with his car, he signed it readily. Okay, then Mr. Robert wishes you a happy life, goodbye. The handover process was smooth and not complicated at all, and Robert got his car back. Robert, who was bored, was driving on the street. Perhaps it was because it was not a weekend. Most people were at work or school, so there were not many people on the street. Really unable to find any fun, Robert could only go back to Midtown High School. He felt that the history class should be over. Jingle bell. Robert had just parked the car and was about to walk to the teaching building when the bell for the end of get out of class suddenly rang. Knowing that the last class was an outdoor class, Robert stopped going upstairs. After finding a seat on the playground and sitting down, Robert waited for his classmates to come down. Hey Robert, here it is. Sure enough, after a while Peter followed the crowd down, glanced around the playground and found Robert and called him quickly. Who is this? Robert walked towards Peter, but when he got closer, he found someone walking with him. Hello, my name is Harry and I am Peter's good friend. He mentioned you to me. Was your name Robert? It's him. Robert had almost forgotten that Peter had this friend. After all, he hadn't been active for long. Although he thought so in his heart, Robert couldn't say it out loud. Instead, he acted very happy and reached out to hold Harry's hand. Yes, first is the affirmation of one's own name, and then comes the business exchange. I often hear Peter mention you and say you are his best friend. Nice to meet you, Harry. Thank you, but I think he will change it to one of the best in the future. Robert and Harry chatted happily, and Peter looked on very happily. After all, these were the two best friends he had ever met. Harry had taken leave because of some things, so he couldn't attend class these days. Peter was explaining Harry's absence from classes for the past few days, which gave Harry an opportunity to complain. Can you imagine? When I was still in high school, my dad wanted me to take over some things in the company. I believe that although I am just a few, no one at my age can handle them well. Harry was talking about what he had experienced in the past few days. Peter might have wanted to comfort his brother, but he opened his mouth but didn't know how to speak. After all, he doesn't have a father with a net worth of over 100 million and a large company with a market value of over 10 billion to inherit. Peter may never experience this kind of trouble in his life. Okay, brother, I appreciate your kindness. Peter's comfort at the side didn't make Harry feel any better. It would be better for him to tell everything and relieve his stress. Not wanting to embarrass his friends, Harry tactfully rejected Peter's illogical comfort. From this, it might be possible to see that they are people from two different worlds. Robert watched the whole process from the sidelines. He didn't speak from beginning to end, just because he was thinking about a question. That's, how did these two become friends? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show off by what I just said. I'm sorry if it made you feel uncomfortable. Harry's next actions told Robert how he became friends with Peter because he was low-key and humble enough. I didn't feel uncomfortable because of it. The silence just now was just that I was attracted by what you said. After all, it is a life that I can't come into contact with in this life. It's not surprising to be curious. Since Harry was the first to apologize to him, it was to give him face. Of course, Robert had to give him face, so he immediately denied that he hated Harry and only said that he was attracted by the topic. Sometimes this life is not what I want. Harry was relieved after hearing Robert's words, and had a good impression of him. He had never liked the kind of people who push their noses and faces. Neither Peter nor Robert. Harry, no one can enjoy power without obligations. Everything you have now is brought about by your ability or your father's ability. Your father has shouldered his obligations, and that's why you are so handsome now. I think you will also be an excellent father in the future. Then don't you want to give the next generation a good life? If you want to, then you have to shoulder your obligations. That way only then can you gain the right to enjoy life. Robert gave his first formal sermon, and the target of his sermon seemed to be Harry, but in fact, it was not the case. What he really wanted to remind was Peter, who was already confused beside Harry. Maybe you're right. Although Harry spoke formally, Robert could still hear the perfunctoriness in his words, but Robert just smiled and turned to Peter. A wise man once said that the greater a person's ability, the greater his responsibility. Obviously, Harry will be a person with great responsibility in the future. Ha ha ha, then my ability is great, isn't it? Harry laughed beside him, obviously taking this kind of comment as a joke and not paying much attention to it. Even Peter did the same. Robert didn't expect his words to have much effect, he just wanted to remind future Spider-Man. After all, as we all know, Peter expanded after gaining extraordinary abilities. If his relatives, who were both father and uncle, were not killed by the bad guys he personally let go, no one knows what Peter would have become. When Robert saw the old man Peter die, he was heartbroken for a while. Although he could not forcefully change the fate of Peter and his uncle, he still tried to make Peter mature as soon as possible. But obviously everyone present except Robert himself, Peter and Harry took this as a joke and passed it off. Being able to give a warning is Robert's limit, because he doesn't want to cause too much deviation in the subsequent plot due to his excessive intervention. After all, he still has 6 ability boxes that are still empty. The ambitious Robert will not be satisfied with ordinary power. The Marvel world and the Infinity Stones can completely attract his attention. Let's walk around, don't just stand here, otherwise people will say there's something wrong with us if we stay here for a long time. Harry said half-jokingly beside him. In fact, his real purpose was to change his position so that he could see someone. A few minutes ago, Mary, you see, Harry and Robert seem to be looking at you. Why don't we go further away and see if they catch up? Mary, don't say that. They might be looking at something else. Even though she said that, Mary couldn't help but look in the direction her friends were pointing, and found that except for Robert, Harry and Peter were all looking at her vaguely. Let's take a walk forward. Saying no with her mouth, but being honest with her body, Mary took the lead and walked away. Wasn't she actually holding a tentative attitude? Peter, I think that's a good idea too. Robert didn't want to get involved with the 2 brothers who fell in love with the same person. He said, you guys go ahead, and then went to a familiar figure. Belinda, it's Robert, he's coming this way. Have a look at my makeup. Belinda turned a blind eye to the busy activities of the 2 best friends beside her. She suddenly felt a little embarrassed now, and she didn't know why. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can Belinda and I talk alone? Okay. Belinda's best friends were a little disappointed to see that they were not here to see them, but they still left obediently. If an ordinary boy said this to them, they might get ridiculed, but for Robert, they didn't have the courage. A few days ago, Robert ignored school rules and injured Flesh. It was impossible for people to forget it so quickly. In fact, the cruel scene at that time left a psychological shadow on many people. Although the school downplayed the incident afterwards, coupled with Robert's recent unassuming and even kind way of dealing with things, many people ignored the original incident. But ignoring it does not mean completely forgetting it, so Robert is still quite famous in his class. Why are you avoiding me? Ever since Robert came here, Belinda has always had her back turned, which made him a little dissatisfied. You know, he spent $100,000 on this girl. Although it was a loan, hasn't it been repaid? Belinda, whose brain had been in a state of shutdown just now, suddenly reacted after being shouted by Robert. She turned around and glanced at Robert with some fear, then quickly lowered her head, like a frightened deer. Robert, who originally had little interest in her, suddenly wanted to possess the girl in front of him for some unknown reason. How do you do it so cute? A hand came forward and hugged Belinda's shoulder. Robert asked without treating himself as an outsider. However, he didn't know how harmful his action was to Belinda. She was pulled into Robert's arms and smelled the scent of someone else that she could not forget since yesterday. Belinda went soft all of a sudden, like an octopus without bones. If there was no one to support her, she might fall to the ground in the next second. Hey, you don't have to react so much, right? Robert actually didn't think about this. There are several classes of people on the playground right now. Hundreds of people may notice him at any time. If they find Belinda paralyzed in his arms, that situation seems to be a little embarrassing. Come on, let's sit on the steps for a while. Really afraid that he would set himself up to die in front of so many people, Robert quickly put Belinda on the nearest step, hoping to let her slow down for a while. They hugged each other so quickly. Belinda started too quickly. It was not that no one noticed Robert and Belinda, but most of them just thought that they were just hugging each other and didn't think about anything else. "How is your mother?" It wasn't an option to keep Belinda paralyzed, so Robert tried to distract her by talking to her. "Well, my mother, well. Hey, why are you just talking and catching your breath? Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to pass the trial?" Although he was trying his best to complain in his heart, Robert still listened to Belinda's words with a serious face. Belinda, who had always been a little nervous when she saw him like this, seemed to have her attention diverted. "The doctor said my mother needs $100,000 for surgery. The money you lent me yesterday is enough." What? Robert was a little confused. If he had enough money, why should he go for treatment? Why should he wait? Belinda was silent for a while, then suddenly raised her head, as if she wanted to ask Robert for help. "My father." Well, Robert heard another story about a gambling addict father who lost all the family's money. Why do these storms always hit the poor? What do you want me to do when you tell me this? I can give you a thorough explanation. Continuing to stay in a situation like your father's can only harm others and yourself. His final destination can only be prison. But I can find him a good one. When she first heard that Robert was going to send her father to prison, Belinda subconsciously wanted to refuse, but then she thought about what Robert said. "I'll take you back tonight and see if I can help you again." "Belinda, thank you." She put on a shy look again, which made Robert unable to stop. Jingle bell. When the school bell rang, most of the students on the playground went back to the classroom to pack their things and prepare to go home, while Robert and Belinda went straight to the parking lot. As far as I know, it is best to treat all diseases as early as possible. If it is delayed, the situation may get worse, and leukemia is no exception. In the passenger seat, Belinda sat like a little daughter-in-law, and she accepted whatever Robert said without any objection. When she was changing gears, her hand rested on Belinda's leg. I don't know why she wore a skirt with knee-length white silk stockings today, which made Robert feel comfortable. Belinda didn't resist, and even moved herself closer to Robert, as if to facilitate him. He just put his hands on those slender legs. Apart from scrubbing from time to time, there was no more movement for a while. The car was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere all the way. Queens, Belinda's home. After returning to this familiar place, her movements were a little awkward for the first time. She straightened her messed-up skirt before getting out of the car. "Let's go." Looking at Belinda in the back, Robert felt like she was just coming home. Instead, she was like a daughter-in-law visiting the house for the first time. It wasn't until she reached the door that Belinda remembered to take out her key and open the door, and then invited Robert into the house. "Belinda." As soon as he entered the house, there was a weak questioning voice. Robert thought it must be Belinda's mother. Following Belinda's guidance, Robert came to a room on the first floor. The air here was full of medicinal smell, and it felt like he was in a pharmacy. In fact, there are many medicines piled here, which makes people mistakenly think that this is a pharmacy. Who is this Belinda? Lying on the bed was a pale woman, a kind of sickly paleness, perhaps because of the pain that made her look a little old at the same time. "Auntie, my name is Robert Betty, and I am Belinda's friend." Belinda was preparing her words just now, but Robert spared her and walked directly to her mother and said, "Oh, she's Belinda's friend. Then you go and sit on the sofa for a while. Auntie will get up and get you some food." As she said this, she struggled to get up. Seeing this, Belinda wanted to help Robert, but she held her down and explained the purpose of her visit. "Auntie, I'm not here for a meal. Here's the thing. I lent Belinda $100,000 yesterday. She originally said she would treat you, but why didn't you show up in the ward?" Belinda's mother was a little confused by this seemingly reproachful statement. She looked at her daughter with questioning eyes, and after she nodded, she confirmed that Robert's words were true. "Belinda never told me that she wanted to borrow money from anyone. I will ask her to pay it back to you." "Belinda," she put on a stern tone, but her previous tried and true tricks were useless, and her daughter obviously didn't listen to her this time. "Belinda, give the money back, I don't need treatment. You will die if you don't go to the hospital. Belinda burst out in silence with a roar, tears bursting from her eyes, and she looked directly at her mother, refusing to give in. I'm not that serious yet. Don't you know about our family's situation? How can we pay back the $100,000? Belinda's mother's words silenced her because she didn't know how to repay the $100,000. Well, actually, you don't have to pay back the money. As soon as Robert finished speaking, both mother and daughter turned their heads to him. Belinda's eyes were filled with gratitude, while her mother looked at Robert with a scrutinizing gaze. How about this as my home, isn't it? How about I sell it to you for $100,000? You want to charge us $100,000 for this shabby house? You are crazy about money. The maximum is $50,000 US. Do you want to sell it or not? The sound of two people talking could be heard in the living room outside the room. Robert was confused, but Belinda and her mother seemed to understand something, and their faces began to panic. Father, are you going to sell the house? Belinda seemed to be extra brave today. Most of the panic on her face disappeared after Robert looked at her. Now she can muster the courage to question her drug addict father. Why didn't you just stay in your room after school and come out? Go back to your room. Jody, let's leave her alone. To be honest, the price of $50,000 is too low. How about we each take a step back and take a step back to $80,000 US? Jody, a gang member in Queens who looks after the casino. Today I happened to meet a guy who lost money and was penniless. Now he came to collect money. Unexpectedly, the conversation turned into selling a house. There was no way around it. Jody couldn't go back empty-handed. There had to be an explanation for the $20,000 lost by Belinda's father and the more than $10,000 she owed for buying fans. Is this your daughter? However, when Jody saw the location and area of the house, he was a little dissatisfied. $50,000 was the highest price he offered, but everything seemed to turn around after meeting Belinda. Yes, she is still in school. What are you still looking at here? Go back to the room. The latter sentence was addressed to Belinda. Wade, I have to talk about you now. How could you be so rough to your daughter? As he spoke, he wanted to get closer to Belinda. From the evil light of desire in his eyes, it could be seen that he had no good intentions. Jody, she's still a kid, let's get back to the topic now. How about $80,000? Wade is a father. Although he is an addict, he still stands in front of his daughter at critical moments. $100,000, let your daughter stay with me for one night. Seeing Wade blocking the way, McGrady didn't bother to pretend anymore and just raised the price to the highest price. Wade, who was still protecting his daughter just now, began to hesitate now. He seemed to be attracted by such a large sum of money and was having a strong ideological struggle. Why? In the end, Wade got out of the way. He staggered his position and presented Belinda in front of Maddie. It was obvious that he had made a choice. At this moment, he no longer had the shame to turn around and see his daughter. Ha ha ha, you made the right choice, Wade. Next time you come to buy powder, I will definitely ask them to pack a few more grams for you. McGrady obviously understood what Wade meant to get out of the way. He was now looking at the charming Belinda, moving her index finger and making a generous promise to Wade. Dad, Belinda called Wade from behind, but what she got was endless silence. Only McGrady responded positively. Oh, my dear daughter's godfather is here, ah. He was walking towards Belinda with an evil smile on his face, but when he was about to get closer, he was knocked far away by a fist punched from nowhere. Robert retracted his fist and looked at Wade, who turned around and picked up the phone. Hello, Mike, I'm Robert. Dean should have mentioned it to you. New York City Police Department, Deputy Commissioner Mike was in the office. A sudden phone call made him busy. Chapter 31. Don't worry, Mr. Robert, I will take care of this addict. Belinda's father was sent to prison by Robert himself, but neither Belinda nor her mother said much, perhaps because they were disappointed with him. And after seeing Robert call a large number of police officers with one phone call from Maddie, and one of the deputy police officers being respectful to him, he also knew that this was someone he couldn't afford to mess with, and he chose to sneak away because his IQ was still online. Pack up and go to the hospital right away. Let's do the surgery first. Robert actually didn't care about Maddie or Wade. He was currently busy sending Belinda's mother to the hospital. After an hour of busy work, the person was pushed into the operating room. Belinda's heart skipped a beat as she watched her mother go in for the operation. "Don't worry, it's okay." Although it was so comforting, Robert was not very sure, because the attending doctor just said that although there was a matching bone marrow, the difficulty of the operation would increase many times because Belinda's mother delayed it for too long, and he could not guarantee whether it would be successful. This is one of the best doctors in the city hospital. If Robert hadn't increased the price and relied on his connections, people wouldn't have taken action. "Yes, it will be fine." Belinda also heard the conversation between Robert and the doctor just now. Although she knew that things might develop in a bad direction, she was still full of hope before the results appeared. The two hugged each other tightly outside the operating room. This time Robert just wanted to give the girl in his arms a little warmth, so he didn't have any bad intentions. From a distance, these two people really look like a couple, and what they are waiting for is their common relatives. Unknowingly, it was getting late, and both Robert and Belinda fell into a deep sleep, until a voice full of joy sounded in their ears after an unknown amount of time. Mr. Robert's surgery was a success. Yeah, Robert was suddenly woken up and did not react. He did not know that the operation was successful until the attending doctor repeated it. "The operation was successful, Mr. Robert. I saw that you two were sleeping soundly, so I didn't wake you up. The patient has been sent to the VIP ward. It would be better for her relatives to accompany her when she woke up just now." After the doctor finished talking to Robert, he looked at the man and woman hugging each other with ambiguous eyes, and left quickly and wisely. "Thank you, Robert." After the doctor left, Belinda hugged him and felt a moist lip pressing against him. Well, Robert, who was forcibly kissed, did not resist. At this moment, he looked like a little daughter-in-law. After a long time, the lips parted. "I'm going to accompany my mother." Belinda's face was already red at this time. She seemed to have lost the courage to look at Robert. After saying something, she ran to the ward. Ha! After Belinda left, Robert licked his lips and chuckled. He thought to himself, "Should I say that being forcibly kissed is nothing like that?" In the underground parking lot of the hospital, Robert, who felt he had finished his work, drove his car back to prepare to go home. It was completely dark while driving on the road. A lot of things happened today. First, the military promoted him and then helped Belinda solve family problems. To be honest, especially the latter thing, Robert suddenly felt a real feeling, as if he was no longer in a dream, everything seemed within reach. He had never subconsciously regarded this as a real world before, even during World War II 70 years ago. Ben, one of his hands was holding the steering wheel, while the other hand mobilized the power of space to condense in his hand. Perhaps this was the origin of his unreal feeling. Spreading his hands and dispersing the power of space in his hands, Robert turned on the car radio. Originally just wanting to listen to music, he unexpectedly got an urgent news break. Emergency interruption, a huge green monster appears on 121st Street. Please stay away from nearby vehicles as soon as possible. Repeat, appear on 121st Street. Squeak. After hearing the news, Robert quickly slammed on the brakes. He looked up at the sign above the driveway. 200 meters ahead, the intersection of 121st Street North and Broadway. Ah, monster. Run. Boom, boom. In just 10 seconds, when Robert looked up at the road sign, the originally orderly vehicles in front suddenly began to make a large-scale U-turn, accompanied by calls for help and explosions. Fake. Robert cursed and got out of the car without hesitation. There was already a traffic jam in front of him, and the situation behind him was not much better. At this time, driving was faster than walking, so Robert simply got out of the car and ran in the opposite direction. Roar. Ha ha ha. Die, you despicable bugs. Help. No. Monster. A huge green figure can already be seen in front of the driveway. At this time, it seems to be in a state of rage and excitement, and it will hit anyone it encounters. The masses of blood and the sound of explosions made this place look like a purgatory on Earth. Tisk, tisk, this thing is so powerful. On the buildings on both sides of the driveway, Robert looked closely at the position of his car. He now knew what had happened. The person doing damage below should be the monster, Abomination, created by the US military, which is a replica of the Hulk. But this replica, it seems a little too manic. Rubbing his chin, Robert looked at Abomination and laughed crazily while approaching his car with destruction. Behind it, a group of U.S. troops appeared in jeeps. If the U.S. military team could have shot and attracted the Abomination before destroying his car, Robert's Audi might have been spared. As for why you don't go down and fight that monster away to protect your property. Robert had never thought about this. The car would cost more than $300,000 at best and it would be ruined. It was not worth exposing Robert's strength to it. If that monster was something he could deal with without using the power of space, Robert wouldn't be stingy about taking action, but when it came to his current trump card, it was better for him to be cautious. There were still some people running away, and Robert stood on the building and could only say sorry. He never regarded himself as a hero who saved lives and helped the wounded. Moreover, this was in the United States, and Robert never felt much sense of belonging. If these people who died have to blame one person, then they can only blame the US government and the military. After all, they are the ones who created this thing. Corporal, I order you to shoot. But our mission is to lure that monster over to me. A group of US troops on a jeep, the machine gunner hesitated after the captain gave the order to fire. Perhaps the shock of hate was so strong that he lost the courage to fire. However, if he hesitated, Robert's car would suffer. Roar, help! Just when Abomination was about to smash Robert's car, a woman happened to run to the car. If the monster just smashed it down, it would probably explode and the person would not survive. The woman seemed to be aware of the huge crisis behind her. Driven by instinct, she squatted on the ground with her head in her hands, as if she could escape in this way. Hey, if you don't want to die, just leave quickly. Robert's voice sounded in front of the woman, but what was different from the past was that he now spoke the Chinese language, not English. The woman actually heard her clearly and answered in Chinese. At this time, she hurriedly rolled away from the place. This may be because her legs were weak from fear. Where did the little bug come from? Robert was now holding the fist smashed by Abomination with both hands. The powerlessness he had not felt for a long time was once again experienced, and this was after the Abomination increased its strength. After canceling the combat authority of a corporal, the captain on the jeep took charge of the vehicle-mounted machine gun and fired at the Abomination behind without hesitation. Most of the long red tongue of fire fell on Abomination's back. However, such a terrifying attack was like scratching an itch for it. It just turned around and focused its energy on Robert. While it was almost dazed, Robert mobilized all the strength in his body and pushed Abomination a few steps away with a fierce push. Dong dong dong. The sound of heavy footsteps was caused by hatred being unable to stabilize his body after suffering a huge force, and kept retreating and falling over. Bang! In the end, it stopped after hitting an off-road vehicle. Perhaps even hatred himself didn't expect that this human being, who looked like a file-size bug to it, could actually exert such great power. Hiss! After pushing Abomination down, Robert screamed in pain. In fact, his current physical condition simply couldn't use all his strength. If he used it forcefully, he would be like now. Pain in the skin and flesh, bleeding in the 5 internal organs. Fortunately, he still has the blessing of human body limit, otherwise Robert, whose internal organs are still of ordinary people's quality, would have died long ago. Captain, what is that? I don't know, it seems to be a person. Don't worry about it for now and quickly reload the machine gun. But I don't think the machine gun will have any effect on that monster. This team member did not dare to speak anymore after being glared at by his captain. He quickly shrank his head and reloaded his ammunition honestly. Roar, bug, I'm going to tear you apart. Hatred seemed extremely angry at this time. The reason was that it was actually pushed over by someone, and the place where it was pushed still hurt. This was absolutely intolerable in its view. It rushed towards Robert again, and the distance of a few steps was reached in an instant. It's too big. Thinking that he still underestimated the hatred, Robert originally wanted to drag it away for a while, but what he never expected was that he couldn't even drag it away for a while without using the power of space. If he hadn't used all his strength just now, he would have died without a burial place. You must know that this was only a minute of contact between him and Hatred. It can be seen how big the strength gap between the two sides is before using gem ability. Roar! Hatred quickly rushed towards Robert, and in his seemingly dull eyes, it slammed down a big fist. Ben! Ah! A blue light curtain suddenly protected Robert's whole body. When the Hatred suddenly hit him, he used the power of space to protect himself. Seeing the right moment, when Abomination punched into the unknown space opened by Robert, he quickly turned off the transmission of space power. The direct result is that the door to space is closed, and the hand of Hatred remains in the unknown space forever. Roar! Neat incisions appeared on Hate's hand, and its palm had been packed away. No matter how excited it was and was not afraid of pain, the pain of losing a hand was inevitable after all. There is still green blood coming out of the wound from time to time, but it can be seen that it is healing at a speed visible to the naked eye, but it is a pity that the hand cannot grow back. Robert also sees the moment when Abomination lost his will to fight. He turned around and ran behind him at such a speed that it was difficult for ordinary people to see his movement speed clearly at night. However, Abomination saw it clearly, but it did not choose to chase him. Instead, it silently waited for the wound to heal. The blue light curtain in front of Robert just now gave it a great shock. Now even if it loses a hand, it doesn't dare to chase Robert anymore, because it hates and doesn't know whether it will be the first to penetrate the light curtain next time. At this moment, the machine gun on the jeep not far away opened fire again, but Robert's hatred was unstoppable and he was trying to vent his anger on the American soldiers, but then... Sue! Two blasts of air were heard, and Hatred instinctively sensed the danger and hurriedly dodged, and two airborne missiles hit the place where it was standing just now. When the helicopters in the sky saw that they could not achieve a single hit, they used their cannons to aim at the Hatred and output a burst of output. Since the crowd at the scene has basically dispersed, the people on the military helicopter can fire boldly without considering the resulting civilian casualties. General Ross, let me go. Helicopter Banner looked at the nearly useless attacks caused by the helicopter and the jeeps on the ground to the Abomination, and he could no longer sit still. Banner was afraid that after the mysterious man chopped off one of Abomination's hands, Abomination regained some sense and ran away. Ross, no way. Don't even think about using that thing to escape again. However, the stubborn U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ross did not appreciate Banner's kindness. Instead, he ordered the nearby troops to quickly approach here through the intercom. He actually wanted to rely on manpower to defeat the Abomination. Banner, don't believe me like this. Many people will die if you do this. Letting the monster inside me come out and deal with it is the best solution. Ross, Sergeant, what's going on with you? How can you let the prisoners in your care talk so freely? Banner's sincere advice was exchanged for a veil that blocked his mouth. Fortunately, his girlfriend, General Ross's daughter, was here, and the veil was quickly removed. I won't let you do this to him. After his girlfriend helped take off the veil, Banner said no more. He was now waiting for Ross to cry when he saw the coffin. The 5th team arrived successfully. Sir, we have already participated in the battle. Squad 7 reports for duty. We have joined the battle. Reports sounded one after another on the intercom, and through the helicopter's camera it could be clearly seen that a U.S. military squad of no less than 200 people had arrived and launched a saturated bullet and artillery shell attack on the Abomination. Obviously without your help, our brave warriors can still control the situation. Ross saw Abomination being beaten in the smoke and unable to hold his head up in the picture. He thought that if this continued, the monster he created would be completely eliminated, so he couldn't help but show off to Banner. Why? Banner just sighed at this. He wanted to remind Ross not to underestimate the enemy, but it was obvious that this would not have any effect, because he had just tried. Sir, the target has not moved for a long time. It may be dead. Do you want to continue attacking? After taking several rounds of fire to deal with the Abomination, the top commander on the ground, a lieutenant colonel, asked Ross through the walkie-talkie while reloading. Keep attacking until you run out of ammunition. After a moment of silence, Ross chose the safest plan. Obviously no one who could sit in his position was a fool. Even though he just said that he had a sure chance of victory, he would not relax at all when it was time to be cautious. Yes, The lieutenant colonel replied on the intercom and began to execute the order. At this time, Banner, who was controlled by 2 American soldiers, had a relaxed look on his face for a moment and then became nervous again, perhaps directly or because something was reminding him. Da, da, da. Boom, boom, boom. Bullets, shoulder-mounted guns, mortars. It can be said that except for the strongest tanks on the ground, many other heavy equipment were used, and they were free of charge. After this round of firepower, the place where Abomination originally stood has been beaten into a big crater. Just now, the figure of Abomination could be vaguely seen clearly, but now it cannot be seen clearly under the thick smoke of the explosion. A set of ammunition has been used up. The second set of ammunition is used up. 4 groups, 7 groups. The sound of gunfire gradually stopped, not because everyone wanted to stop but because they had run out of bullets and had to stop. Send someone to check on the monster. The sound of the on-site combat troops running out of ammunition kept coming. Finally, after the last team ran out of ammunition, Ross couldn't help but want someone to go and take a look at the situation. Don't want. Banner had a very bad feeling at this time, and he subconsciously wanted to stop Ross from issuing the order to investigate. 2 sergeants, this is my last warning, watch your prisoners. However, Ross did not appreciate it and instead asked Banner to be treated more strictly. 2 American soldiers were in a dilemma next to him. On the one hand, there were orders from the lieutenant general, and on the other hand, there were orders from the lieutenant general's daughter, and they even took it upon themselves to maintain it. To be honest, they didn't know what to do, so they could only look at Banner with a wry smile. Banner was embarrassed to be stared at by the 2 men, but he decided to work hard for the lives of the people below. Woo! Unexpectedly, when he was about to speak, he was covered with a handkerchief. The 2 soldiers had no choice. In comparison, they were more afraid of General Ross. Hey, don't be like this. Although General Ross's daughter once again stopped him, it was obvious that the actions of these 2 soldiers made Ross very satisfied. You guys did a great job. Unexpectedly, just after he finished speaking, the voice of the investigation team came over the intercom. What is that? No, 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 that monster is not dead yet. Please support. Beep. There is a sound of signal connection failure coming from the walkie-talkie. This situation generally only occurs when the equipment is damaged. Ross no longer felt as complacent as before. He turned off the walkie-talkie. The fate of the 7-person investigation team could be imagined. Roar! Abomination jumped out of the ruins, and the U.S. military closest to it suffered. After losing their ammunition, they could only choose to attack with cold weapons in this situation. Bump. The scene was like purgatory. Some people were smashed into pieces by the hatred with only one hand left before they could scream. On a helicopter far away from the battlefield, General Ross watched the hatred in the ground harvesting the lives of American soldiers like a scythe, and his teeth itched with hatred. Can I talk now? Banner behind Ross also saw the situation on the ground clearly. In fact, the 2 soldiers beside him were frightened. Are you sure? Under the premise of massive deaths of combatants, Ross still compromised. Banner, how will you know if you don't try? Open the helicopter door. As he said this, he wanted to jump out of the helicopter, but the hatch was controlled by the control room. Ross, listen to him and open the hatch. Betty. Banner. Ross's daughter Betty was obviously more worried about her boyfriend's safety, but Banner insisted on doing so. I can solve it. The helicopter door opened, and Banner said softly to Betty before jumping out. Dong! An unknown heavy object fell in front of Hate, forming a deep pit. Ho! I am your opponent. A roar different from hatred sounded, and the Hulk, walked out of the pit. The battle between Hulk and Abomination was about to break out, but perhaps because of the missing hand, Abomination was suppressed from the beginning. You can play slowly by yourself. Hatred, who still had a trace of reason, obviously knew that he couldn't defeat Hulk in his own state, so he decided to run away first, but how could Hulk let it do so? Roar! Half an hour later, with a low roar, Abomination received the lunchbox earlier than the original time and space, and was strangled by Hulk with an iron chain. In the residential buildings on both sides of the battlefield, Robert never left. It wasn't that he was selfless and wanted to stay with the American troops to defeat the Abomination, but that he was injured and couldn't run too far. In some dark corridors, if someone brought a lamp at this time, they would be able to find Robert covered in blood. His skin seemed to be intact, but if you looked closely, you could see tiny cracks from which blood flowed. Those tiny cracks are all over the body, which is caused by the overload of space energy on Robert. Fortunately, thanks to the blessing of human body limit, Robert has a self-healing speed that is far beyond ordinary people. His current appearance may seem terrifying, but in fact, most of the wounds have scabbed and the blood on the surface has solidified. But even so, it will take 2 or 3 days to return to normal. It's still too much. Robert sighed secretly. He felt that the reason why he was like this was because he did not use the strongest space power when he took action at the beginning. The battle with Abomination had just begun, but he actually chose to use his body to fight against a monster that even tanks and guns couldn't kill, causing him to be injured. After that, in order to save his life, he used the power of space, which was extremely taxing on his body. Fortunately, when his health was at its peak, he could carry it for a long time. But he had already injured his internal organs just now, and it would be an exaggeration to say he was seriously injured. Hey, I lost a lot of money. Director, the trouble caused by General Ross has been solved by himself, but in the top floor office of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, the director, is listening to reports from his subordinates. Nick, but what, Agent Carlson? I don't know how to describe it. Just look at the surveillance on the street. As Carlson's close confidant, Nick felt that he would definitely not make a mistake in this kind of thing, so he carefully watched the surveillance video played. Bug, I'm going to tear you apart. On the surveillance camera, Hatred was opened a few steps away by a person, and then fell to the ground. The sound on the surveillance camera now is Hatred roaring after getting up. Nick, if I'm not mistaken, that's a person, right? Coulson. Sir, I don't think there's any doubt about this, but it's not the most shocking. As soon as he said this, the figure with the hatred turned on was played on the monitor. When the monster approached again, a blue light screen suddenly appeared in front of him. Roar! The hateful hand penetrated the light curtain and disappeared directly, as if it was swallowed up by the light curtain. The surveillance stopped abruptly, but Nick's mood could not calm down for a long time. If the man just had the power to compete with monsters, the ability he used next was simply a divine power. Nick, who is he? As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury will never allow such a person to exist who is completely ignorant of information. It seemed that he had already thought that he would say this. Coulson was already ready at the side. He saw that the image of the mysterious man facing the camera in his computer surveillance was found. Then it continued to zoom in, and with the supercomputer decoding, a clear photo of the mysterious man was calculated. Why is it him? Nick and Coulson looked at each other. It was obvious that he knew the man in the photo. To be precise, he had only met him a few days ago. Coulson, who had already seen the photos analyzed by the mysterious man, was not too surprised. Instead, he was surprised by Nick's explanation. The accuracy of the pictures obtained through analysis and decoding with the participation of supercomputers can reach more than 90%, sir. As he spoke, he glanced at the photos on the computer and turned back to Nick Fury. Obviously this hell messenger has something to hide. In the building next to 121st Street, Robert looked at the sealed scene. He knew that even if his car was intact, he would not be able to get it out now. Now half an hour has passed since the battle, and Robert's wounds have initially healed. Although he still looks like a bloody man, he has actually improved a lot. The most serious injury is to the internal organs. Feeling waves of pain in his body, his shortcomings have always been in his internal organs. From this fight with Abomination, it can be seen that the wounds on the skin can be healed in a few hours, while the internal injuries will take at least 2 days to heal. Superior. This has to be the case with the blessing of human body limit. If not, Robert would be completely cold by now. Oh, let's go home first. He stood up while enduring the pain. It wasn't that he didn't want to rest for a while, but that the US military had already begun to approach the nearby buildings after sealing off the scene, probably to further block the news. After all, if all taxpayers knew that the money they paid was used on something that was extremely harmful to them, there would probably be trouble again. Robert took out the mobile phone in his pocket and looked at it. He found that it was almost early in the morning. He estimated the distance from home and chose a more labor-saving method. Boy, hand over the money, or else. After only running a few blocks, Robert found the target in a relatively dark alley. There were two people here, holding a knife and threatening a young man who wandered into an alley for some unknown reason. Of course, what attracted Robert was not the robbery, nor the person being robbed, but the motorcycle beside him. Forget it, a motorcycle is a motorcycle. Robert's original goal was to get a gangster car to drive, but after walking around for a few blocks, he didn't see these two little shrimps, and he didn't bother to think about it since he didn't have to walk. Boss, I really have no money. Stop talking nonsense. If you dare to say you have no money, I will put a pair of eyes on you and make you bleed. Huh, what nonsense are you talking to him about? Among the two gang robbers, the one with the more violent temper obviously picked up the knife in his companion's hand and stabbed the young man. Seeing that the knife was about to stab him, the man who was robbed quickly instinctively blocked it with his hands, and couldn't help but let out a scream. Bang, bang, boom. There was a sound like something falling to the ground, and the young man who was robbed didn't open his eyes until the sound of an engine faded away. Originally, he thought that the robber decided to let him go because he had no money, but what he never expected was that when he opened his eyes, he saw two figures lying on the ground. If you look closely, aren't they the two people who robbed him just now? But now they are all lying on the ground and they don't know whether they are alive or not. What's going on? Wrong. The young man who was still hesitating whether to go forward and take a look suddenly realized. Isn't now a good time to escape? Boom. The roar of motorcycle engines resounded on the streets of New York in the early morning. It is indeed a world-renowned economic capital. Even in the early hours of the morning, there were still many vehicles on the streets. It wasn't until Robert drove out of the city that things got much better. The occasional vehicle on the road allowed him to give full play to the performance of the motorcycle he picked up. After another 20 minutes, Robert finally arrived at his home. He eagerly picked up the key and went in. Fortunately, he had brought his mobile phone and keys with him when he got out of the car, otherwise he would have to climb over the wall if he wanted to enter the house now. Call. After washing off the blood on his body in the bathroom, Robert, who felt relaxed, exhaled a breath, and then lay down on the bed without bothering to think about anything else. He was considered tired today. However, what he didn't know was that an earthquake about him was being carried out by the U.S. military and SHIELD. Father, Dean, who was sleeping soundly in the U.S. military base, was suddenly woken up by a phone call. He was a little angry at first, but he stopped being angry after seeing who the caller was, and hurriedly answered the phone. Well, I know you were resting just now, but there is something very important that you need to go to. You go to New York first, and I will explain it to you on the way. After Dean hurriedly organized himself, he quickly used his special authority to call an F-15 to fly directly to New York. When you get to New York, go see Robert in person. I have something to ask him. These were the last words Burns said to Dean before getting on the plane. SHIELD headquarters, Nick Fury personally gave orders to his two most trusted subordinates. Coulson, Melina, you two must bring Robert over to me, we have to talk to him. Yes, yes, they answered twice in unison, and they left after Fury nodded. Robert, who had no idea that he had been involved in a storm, was sleeping soundly at the moment, and he slept until the next morning. What is Coulson's mission this time? Why do we still need to find that antique from World War II? On the outskirts of New York City, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, on a quiet road, a vehicle driven by Agent Coulson was driving here, while Melina, who was in the passenger seat, asked with some confusion. Melina, don't underestimate this old antique. He effortlessly chopped off a monster's hand yesterday. Which one are you talking about that was created by General Ross? Melina in the passenger seat became serious. She sat up and asked her companion. Coulson, yes. Melina, what is the level of this mission? Top secret. Melina's expression became completely serious. She now knew that this mission was definitely more than just attendance, and there might be a fierce battle to be fought. Relax, Melina. Although our operation this time is top secret, it is definitely not as dangerous as other missions. Believe me, if Director Fury feels threatened, the action team's aircraft and cannon will be dispatched. Coulson, the main driver, saw that Melina's hand had already been placed on her waist, where the gun was placed, so he quickly asked her to relax. In fact, there is one thing he didn't say, that is, even if they use guns to target Robert, there may not be any threat. Arrive. Outside a villa, Coulson had just parked his car and was about to ring the doorbell with Melina, but unexpectedly Dean arrived at this time. Who are you? Dean got out of the car and saw two suspicious people approaching Robert's house. Being wary, he subconsciously made a defensive posture. Because just now, after he came out of the nearby Air Force Base in New York, his father, Burns, called again. During the call, he told Dean why he wanted him to come in person this time. There is ample evidence that Colonel Robert has supernatural powers, although this is top secret. But beware of anyone trying to do something bad to him. Now, Dean, I'm ordering you to take Colonel Robert to the Air Force Base for protection. Dean had seen his father speak in such a solemn tone several times, and it was always a matter of great importance to many people. Obviously, it was the same this time, perhaps even more important. Shield agent, Colonel. Melina took out an ID and looked it in front of Dean's eyes. She said that if an ordinary person pulled out a gun in front of her, she would kill him first without even thinking about it. But it's a different matter if this kind of thing happens to a person wearing the uniform of an Air Force colonel. After all, she doesn't want to cause unnecessary misunderstandings. Why is Shield here? After confirming that the ID was correct, Dean put down his hand that was about to hold the gun, and then asked. Coulson. We met Colonel, remember? It was the day when Mr. Robert was handed over. Coulson pulled his grumpy colleague aside and stepped forward to negotiate. I'm asking why Shield is here. However, Dean obviously didn't show his dignity and continued to ask forcefully. Seeing Dean's attitude, Melina instantly became angry. What's the point of talking to him? After saying that, he stepped forward to teach Dean a lesson. This time they did not bring up the tried and true Shield brand. Obviously, it did not work in front of a colonel whose father was a general of the U.S. military. Moreover, Dean's appearance here more or less contains some figures from the military behind him. HMPH, who is afraid of whom? Apparently, Dean was not afraid of a woman clamoring to teach him a lesson, but instead felt a little disdainful. The arrogant Dean suffered a big loss in the face of Shield's senior agent. He and Melina fought for only 1 minute, and Dean himself was kicked out by someone who found his flaw. Come again. Come and come, who is afraid of whom? Melina looked at Dean, who had been kicked far away by her. After seeing him get up in disgrace, she was still dissatisfied and decided to give him a more profound lesson. Coulson. Okay, Melina, stop fighting, or you'll offend this person and we'll have a hard time doing business. Coulson pulled his companion and reminded him in his ear, but Melina didn't take it seriously at all. We are on a mission, remember? What should we do if we encounter obstacles now? As he spoke, he made a mocking gesture towards the angry Dean, who was so angry that he immediately hit him. Although Dean was angry, the punch he threw was a standard military punch, a uniform punch, and it did not mean a fatal blow. Obviously, even if he gets angry again, he has not yet lost his mind. He still understands the balance between enemies and friends. Bang! In another fight, Dean didn't even last 30 seconds before he was knocked to the ground again. The boxing skills are good but a bit stiff. Melina obviously also knew the type of punch that Dean used to attack her. After knowing that the opponent had no intention of killing, she actually started to encourage him. However, in Dean's opinion, this was a great shame and humiliation. In the past, it was him who abused others. When would it be someone else's turn to abuse him, let alone a woman? With a hateful roar, Dean stood up to attack again. A minute later. Bang! Bang! Who is it? What are you screaming there so early in the morning? It's spring. Robert was sleeping soundly, but perhaps because the window was not closed, the sound from outside came in. Not to mention that the sound was small, but the key point was that the sound was loud and very regular. Finally, Robert couldn't bear it anymore, got up, put on his pajamas, and yelled out the window. Mr. Robert, I am Agent Coulson. We have met, remember? Dean, what's wrong with you? Coulson was ignored once again. He was somewhat used to it. Compared with him who was intact now, Dean, who was originally wearing an Air Force uniform and had a cool temperament, was now gray, bruised and swollen. Walking on the road, it turned heads all the time, no wonder Robert caught sight of it. Uncle Carrot Pig, well, now I have to add a slurred speech, and the rate of return is even higher. Robert was already a little angry when he saw the junior who often wiped his butt being made like this. Originally, he wanted to jump down directly to seek revenge on Coulson, the only aggressive person present, but considering that he was wearing nothing under his pajamas. Because there was a woman down there, he had to endure it for a while, get dressed, and then go down the stairs. Mr. Robert, when he opened the door below just now, he saw Coulson saying hello with a smile on his face, but Robert, who misunderstood that he injured Dean, would not look kindly on him. Coulson is used to it, he's really used to it. Dean, what's wrong with you? Who hit you? Robert simply ignored the possibility of the woman present hurting Dean. He was now ready to go. Just waiting for Dean to identify Coulson, he would fly to avenge Dean. The reason why it didn't escalate to the level of shouting and killing was because Robert had some impression of this Coulson, but he didn't know much about it. He only knew that he should have seen it and what organization he was from. Yes, Melina, who was standing aside, was about to admit it to herself. She expected that Robert would not dare to do anything to her. Even if she dared to be a fighting maniac, she would not panic at all and even looked forward to fighting the legendary Hell Messenger in World War II. Yes, I dropped it myself. Dean took over the topic and faced Robert's inquiry that he was bitten to death because of his own fall. Coulson originally thought that he would inevitably apologize later, but he didn't expect that the colonel had such a high self-esteem, which saved them a lot of trouble. Seeing that this absurd misunderstanding had come to an end, Coulson stepped forward and took out his ID and said to Robert, "Mr. Robert, we are SHIELD agent. There is a matter that we need your personal help to investigate." "Uncle Robert, don't believe them. My father himself said that someone wants to harm you, and that you need to go to a military base to be safe." Finally, when it came to business this time, Dean had no problem with his pronunciation. On one side are the SHIELD people with documents who want to take him away, and on the other side are friends who want to take him to the military base in the name of protection. Robert is caught in the middle. Not difficult at all, because he sided with the military without even thinking about it. Dean called your father and told him to get rid of these two guys. Good. Seeing that Robert was on his side, Dean's anxious heart finally calmed down, and he hurriedly started dialing his father's phone number. Don't even think about fighting. Seeing that his side's mission was about to fail, Coulson accepted his fate, but what he never expected was that his companion would dare to take action in front of the Hell Messenger. Melina reached out with one hand, and at an extremely fast speed, she was about to pass Robert's eyes and reach Dean behind him, who was about to make a phone call. Snort. Just when she was about to succeed, a hand stretched out when she was defenseless and grabbed her stretched out hand tightly, preventing her from moving. Melina was caught and felt like she was locked tightly with a branding iron. She couldn't break free at all. However, how could it not be her style to give up like this? She kicked out, and the position was extremely tricky. It was clearly directed at Robert's lower body. A normal man could instantly lose his fighting power with just one blow. Little did he know that all her actions were in Robert's eyes. Seeing that she had resorted to such cruel tricks, she immediately stopped showing mercy. Don't want. Boom. With the sound of a punch punching through the air, Robert's fist deflected away from Melina's side. This was because her feet were also deflected just now, otherwise she would have been disabled if the punch had hit her body firmly and not killed her. Gudong. Coulson swallowed and salivated. He couldn't believe how much force it took to make a loud noise from the punch. The sound just now exploded in Melina's ears, and now there is still a buzzing, tinnitus in one of her ears, but she can't care about it now. At this time, Melina's back was already wet, because just now she truly felt the threat of death coming and her body reacted instinctively. Now her body was numb, and the muscles in her body were shaking from time to time. She was so scared that she became stiff. Hey, my father, Uncle Robert, is right next to me. Do you want to tell him in person? Okay. Dean dialed the phone from the side. In fact, he also saw the scene just now, but before he could be surprised, the call went through. Hello, Burns. Robert, holding the mobile phone, walked aside, leaving Melina trembling in the same place, still uncontrollably, like a mouse meeting a cat. Melina, are you okay? Although he was dissatisfied with his teammates' unauthorized actions, after all, it was Coulson, his partner for many years, who hurriedly stepped forward to show concern after Robert left. You were always so unexpected. You were like this before and you were like this now. Burns on the other end of the phone said with a sigh, as if he was reminiscing about the past. This is not true as I wish. If you want to know the origin of my ability, I can tell you that it comes from the thing that Hydra used to make weapons. Robert already knew the reason why the military and S.H.I.E.L.D. came to find him. He had already thought of this result when he used the power of space yesterday, but what he didn't expect was that the people from both sides came so quickly. Why? Burns sighed after a brief silence. Obviously, this issue was still a bit difficult for him in a high position. I will tell those who are in urgent need of your words exactly as they are, but I still hope that you can come to a hearing in person so that my pressure will be much less. I'm afraid I can't do it today because I have something to do. I'll go there in a few days during the holidays. I'm still a student now, remember. As long as you can come to the hearing, you can set the time within 15 days. Don't worry, it will just be a formality. Then Dean will prepare a manuscript for you about patriotism and willingness to protect citizens. Just read it according to it. It's important. Just stop those guys' mouths. Robert felt it was effortless to talk to his own people, and he was really touched by Burns's once again generous gesture. Burns still said the same words as before. If you need my help, just ask, but now I have two SHIELDs who need your help. Burns, your commitment carries much more weight now than it did before. Do you know what some people in the military and government now call you? Kindness. Burns. True God. Ha ha ha, is it true? I'm afraid those guys who say I'm a threat are the majority, right? Robert didn't take these words seriously and only regarded them as compliments among friends. Burns didn't say anything more about this and left the last sentence. S.H.I.E.L.D. people will solve it in 10 minutes. After leaving these words, Burns hung up the phone. Dean, go in and take a shower. You're not half as handsome now as you were then. After returning the phone to Dean, Robert asked him to go into the house and clean it up. His current condition was really not suitable for seeing people. He was covered in dust and dirt. Those who know him well know that Dean is an Air Force colonel, while those who don't know him may think he is a beggar who picked up a military uniform. Okay, Uncle Robert. Dean was also very aware of his current decline, so he did not refuse Robert's kindness. He said hello and walked into the villa. Ben. After Dean left, Robert performed a space power, swallowing the roadside flower bed in front of S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson and Melinda. In the shocked eyes of the two, Robert walked up to them and said, I choose to cooperate with the military. There will be a hearing about me within 15 days. If you are interested, you can come and participate. Also, let me give you a reminder that my ability comes from the thing that Hydra used to make weapons. After a pause, Robert continued. I only know so much, do you or your director believe it or not? Jingle bell. 10 minutes passed, and the phone's ringtone rang on time as if planned. Glancing at the dialer, Coulson felt bitter because his mission had failed. Hey, director, retreat, Coulson, Nick. Fury just said one thing on the phone and then hung up. It was obvious that he was in a bad mood. Melinda, what should we do? Do we really want to retreat? Withdraw. Looking back at Robert's residence for the last time, Coulson had no choice but to retreat, but at the same time he thought in his heart. If this house was provided by S.H.I.E.L.D. for Robert, would his attitude be different now? Coulson suddenly realized what the problem was, that is, S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed to have ignored this hell messenger. They had never had a good relationship before. Is it possible for him to accept it now that he is just improvising? All right. After witnessing Robert's tyrannical force, even the arrogant Melinda had to choose to give up when things couldn't be done. After the S.H.I.E.L.D. two left, Robert and Dean also walked out of the house one after another. I have to trouble you to give me a ride today. My car was detained at the scene last night. Dean, okay, Uncle Robert, I'll take you there. As for your car, I'll say hello later and they'll send it back to your home. Robert, who was sitting in the back seat of the military jeep, was indifferent to this. Because he currently has 120 million US dollars displayed in his bank account. What kind of car does he need? I guess Tony will be back soon, right? Guessing that time was almost up, Robert opened the stock market again, and after flipping through Stark Industries stocks, he found that they had been floating around $330 per share recently. Obviously, after losing Tony, Stark's stock price had hit bottom. From the original price of $800 per share to the current $330, Stark's share price has more than halved. This is the disadvantage of integrating most of the company's weapon innovations with its sole figures. Although he was sighing in his heart, Robert also purchased shares of Stark Company, directly spending $110 million to purchase more than 300,000 shares. Having left nearly $10 million for himself, Robert was not afraid of losing the money, but because he really couldn't determine the date of Tony's return. If he didn't come back until a month later, what would Robert do with this time? Going to Midtown High, Uncle Robert? Dean asked habitually after getting in the car. Originally, I wanted to rest at home if you didn't come. Forget it, I'll drive to the Columbia University Institute of Science and Technology. It turns out that Robert, whose body was not fully recovered, wanted to recuperate at home today, but he had no choice but to be woken up early in the morning, so he simply went to witness history. The birth of Spider-Man. Dean. Okay. Outside the Columbia University Academy of Sciences, Peter was looking around, looking for his companions. Mary. Hey. At this moment, Peter saw that the girl next door, whom he had liked since childhood, seemed to be saying hello to him. He was flattered and hurriedly responded. Peter. Yes, I'm here. Before he finished speaking, 3 female classmates came up behind him and ran straight in Mary's direction. Obviously, he was not the one they called him. Do you have to park here? Different from Peter's embarrassment, his friend Harry was sitting in a slowly approaching Rolls-Royce, but he may have his own reasons and did not want to expose the fact that his family was rich. Wow, hey, Harry. Norman sat next to his son Harry in the Rolls-Royce. He obviously saw the classmates happily greeting his son. Norman. Look Harry, how enthusiastic your classmates are. They are not enthusiastic about me. Why don't I take the Jetta and come to you and try it? After saying that, he got out of the car speechlessly and went straight to his friend Peter. Hi, Peter. Obviously this time there would be no more embarrassment than before, and Peter happily met up with his friends. Harry. Unexpectedly, they had just taken 2 steps and Harry's father got out of the Rolls-Royce behind them. He was here to deliver his school bag. Thank you, father. But it was obvious that Harry didn't appreciate it very much. After replying perfunctorily, he wanted his father to leave, as if it was embarrassing to have money. Uncle Norman, it's nice to meet you. I once read your paper. To be honest, it was an eye-opener for me. Unlike Harry, Peter couldn't be rude in front of his elders. It was a matter of upbringing, so he said hello and then sincerely praised the other person. Norman. Oh, thank you. But, I mean, do you understand? But obviously Peter's way of greeting made Norman a little confused. He knew the difficulty of the paper and it was obviously something that ordinary high school students couldn't understand. Peter ranked second in the class. Harry, who felt that his friend was being questioned by his father, did not hesitate to speak for his friend Peter. Norman. Oh, that's great. Then Harry, you should study more with Peter. In fact, he didn't bother to care whether Peter could read or understand his paper. What Norman cared about from beginning to end was his son's attitude. I want you to say. Harry was so casual about his father, he muttered something to his face and prepared to leave with Peter. Kindness. But when he went to pull Peter, he found that he showed no sign of leaving, so he looked at him suspiciously. Peter. Robert seems to be here. The head teacher said before that he might not come. Bang. When Peter saw Robert, he had actually been seen a long time ago. After letting Dean drive up to a few people, he got out of the military vehicle without hesitation, closed the door and walked towards the people. Hi, Peter, Harry, if I guess correctly, this should be Uncle Norman, right? Robert directly met Peter and the 3 people who were talking, and accurately guessed Norman's identity. After all, it was impossible for Robert not to recognize the first-generation Green Goblin who would be famous in the future. Oh, who is this gentleman? Norman saw Robert getting out of a military vehicle just now, and with sharp eyes, he also saw through the open window that the driver was a colonel officer. Almost instinctively, he began to pay attention to Robert. "Harry, he is our classmate. Please, the classmates in Father's class are still waiting for us. Don't waste our time. You'd better go back first." With that said, Harry stepped forward and pulled Peter and Harry away, leaving Norman stroking his chin in deep thought. I wonder how such a character could attend a public high school. Norman rubbed his chin and thought for a while. He still couldn't figure it out, so he simply didn't want to think about it. However, before leaving, he decided to remind his son that Harry should make more friends with Robert when he went back. To be able to sit so casually and calmly with a colonel driving here, it is not easy to even think about it with your toes. Now that the students are all here, let's start the tour, but one thing is that you have to follow me closely and don't run around, otherwise your credits will be gone. Although the leading teacher knew that his threats were of no use to some people, they were only a few after all, and he still had to say what he should say. In fact, when Peter and the others were chatting just now, he wanted to call them to leave, but Robert's sudden appearance made the teacher stop talking. In addition to teachers from Zhongcheng School, teachers from Columbia University, the host, led the tour this time. This is our large research laboratory. The main topic is to observe a very magical creature in nature, the spider. Please look here, they are a very unique breed. After long-term observation, we have concluded that they have the ability to perceive, and even have the ability to predict danger. The teachers from Columbia University gave lively speeches above, while the leading teachers from Midtown were mainly responsible for maintaining discipline. Can I take a photo and send it to the newspaper? While everyone was listening to the teacher's speech, Peter also became interested. He took out his camera and raised his hand to ask. University teacher, of course, no problem. Focusing on the spider in the transparent observation cabin, this time perhaps because Robert, a powerful friend, was present, no one dared to touch Peter anymore, so he was able to take a perfect photo. Is the picture ready? The university teacher asked, and after Peter nodded, she started to explain the next subject, spiders. Hey, Peter, I think you should just hold the camera and shoot those spiders. Harry said next to Peter, and looked at Mary, who was standing alone outside the transparent warehouse observing spiders. Peter obviously understood the meaning in his brother's eyes. He looked at Robert and Harry shyly and then expressed some timidity. Forget it, you better go ahead. After receiving Peter's statement, Harry turned his eyes to Robert, as if asking him if he would make a move. Forget it, I'm not interested in Mary. Waving his hand, Robert spoke from his heart this time. He didn't think the goddess in Peter's dream was very beautiful. Okay, I'll go then. After the two expressed their opinions one after another, Harry walked up nervously and chatted with a girl about spiders. These were what Peter told him just now, and Harry used them reasonably. Wow, really, I don't know if it's true or not, but Mary was very happy to hear it, and even exclaimed from time to time. I thought I just said you had to keep up with the team. But their chat didn't last long, as the teacher from Midtown High School came over and interrupted, asking Harry, Mary, and Peter, who was watching the play, to follow. As for Robert, the teacher in Zhongcheng just glanced at him and looked like you were casual. Ah, okay. As if someone had discovered what he was doing, Harry hurriedly left Mary's side and walked toward the class. Seeing his friend leave, Peter, who had already missed an opportunity, decided to muster up the courage to take a photo with the girl he liked. Mary, can you take a photo? I'll distribute it to the campus newspaper. Peter, who originally wanted to invite him, was embarrassed in the end, so he finally changed his mind and asked in the name of the school magazine. But even so, it is a leap in life for Peter. Okay. Mary seemed to be in a good mood now. She did not refuse Peter's request and even posed in various interesting poses in front of the camera. Her hands pointed at the spider in the transparent cabin in various ways, but what Mary didn't know was that Peter had no intention of paying attention to the spider, but quietly moved the camera to her body. Where neither of them noticed, a special creature that fell from the sky had quietly climbed onto Peter's hand. But Peter, who was concentrating on taking pictures, or was just peeping openly, obviously failed to notice this in time. Just when he found a girl in a very beautiful posture and was about to take pictures, a sharp pain hit him instantly. Ah! He released his hand from pressing the shutter button and quickly checked the location of the pain. He found 2 marks of being bitten by something. Mary, what's wrong? No. Nothing. Maybe it was the dark face of the teacher from Zhongcheng not far away, or maybe it was because the wound only hurt from the bite and he didn't feel anything now. Anyway, Peter subconsciously concealed the fact that he was bitten. Maybe he didn't even care at this time. Robert, who was standing nearby and witnessed the whole process, couldn't help but sigh that this was really a wonderful coincidence. This situation might not have happened even if it was a little off. I hope this tour goes smoothly, okay. Peter and Mary, who returned to the team, were both blamed, and the teacher in Zhongcheng didn't even give them a chance to explain. After being criticized, the Zhongcheng students who followed were obviously more well-behaved. After the 3-hour visit, except for the first half of the road behind, everyone was well-behaved. Because Robert had followed the army from beginning to end, although he was the only person present who was not afraid of punishment, he did not want to do anything special. Okay students, today's visit is over. Thank you all for visiting. I also hope that the outstanding ones among you will be admitted to Columbia through your own efforts. With an iconic closing sentence, Robert found that no matter where in the world, people like these teachers always seem to like to talk at length. The Columbia University teacher's personal speech ended after 5 minutes, and the students from Midtown High School also left the venue in an orderly manner. They could choose to have their parents pick them up, or go back by themselves. Robert, do you guys take the school bus? Peter followed the class team and asked a question that seemed a bit silly, because who among the students present didn't know that Harry was a rich second generation? Although he concealed it himself, after all, after spending such a long time together, how could the classmates who stayed with him day and night not know? For a rich second generation to take the school bus, unless it is to experience life, it is absolutely impossible. Harry, no Peter, my father sent someone to pick me up outside. Goodbye. Sure enough, Harry refused, but contrary to many people's expectations, Robert said he would take the school bus. He came here in a military jeep in the morning. This was undoubtedly a disguised way of telling others that he had a background. It seemed unreasonable for such a person to take a cheap school bus. What can I do? My car won't be returned until this afternoon. It happened that Robert didn't leave any important things in the car except his wallet. Now if he didn't take the school bus, how could he take a taxi? After arriving at the destination, Robert told the driver, "Scan it." In this country monopolized by capital and bankers, their conservative inherent impression does not allow the emergence of a novel thing to challenge their original interest system, unless the thing has objective profits. However, it is obvious that there is no essential difference between swiping a card and scanning a QR code to pay. Apart from convenience, there will be almost no increase in the interests of public capital. So how can they have the idea to do it? I'll just take the school bus. My car was scratched yesterday and had to be repaired. Robert couldn't stand the doubtful looks from a large group of people, so he made up a random reason as if he wanted to give them an explanation. Harry originally had doubts like everyone else, but he was relieved after Robert explained. After all, who can guarantee that there will be no accident one day? That's okay, Robert. A voice from the side interrupted him, and also interrupted Robert's original intention to get on the school bus. Why are you here? Naturally, Robert stopped getting on the bus and was about to go home. After saying hello to the teachers at Midtown High School and Peter, he hurried towards the person who called him not far away. Harry, why does this person look familiar? Peter, I also think he looks like Captain America. Peter rubbed his chin and thought for a while. Looking at the back of the car who had already gotten into the car, he came to a surprising conclusion. Harry, ha 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 ha, I didn't expect you to still have humor. Don't tell me that the heroes of World War II are still alive today. Please, I will burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. Harry didn't take Peter's words seriously, but thought he was joking. Peter, are you going to get in the car or not? If you don't come up, go outside by yourself. Peter, oh, Peter, who was about to say that he was not joking, was urged to get into the car by his classmates who were anxious to go home, and Harry also walked to the car arranged by his father amidst laughter. This is the second time Robert has ridden in a military jeep today. Although the types of vehicles are different, they are all military vehicles. Captain, why do you have time to find me? On the passenger side, Robert asked directly as soon as he got into the car. 3 hours ago, in the SHIELD headquarters, Nick Fury, who had just received a mandatory order from the World Security Council, especially from the American representative, threw down his phone in frustration. Call. Half a minute later, he finally controlled his emotions and originally wanted to hide his flag for the time being. Jingle bell. A call suddenly came to Nick, who was in a state of anger. He didn't want to answer it at first, but when he saw the person who dialed the call clearly, his face suddenly became serious. Despite some reluctance, he could only answer the phone. Nick Fury. What's going on, Commissioner? A few minutes later, Nick hung up the phone and made a quick decision to immediately call his cronies, Coulson. Sorry, sir. The call was picked up instantly, and Coulson sounded apologetic as soon as he opened his mouth. This is not your problem, Coulson. Now you have a new mission. After telling Coulson the outline of the mission, Nick made a few more calls. First action team, please take orders, sir. The third action team obeys the order. Sixth action team. Seventh line. 10 action teams composed of elite special forces under SHIELD, totaling more than 1,000 people, received the order almost at the same time, and they began to assemble towards New York as quickly as possible. Such a large-scale troop mobilization, no matter how covert it is still in the United States after all. The Pentagon, which is in charge of military affairs, got the news only 5 minutes after the incident happened. 10 minutes later, an emergency meeting organized by the current Minister of Defense was held at the highest level. That's too much. What does SHIELD want to do? How dare they deploy troops without any prior notice? A middle-aged major general said indignantly. Obviously SHIELD's approach made him very dissatisfied. HMPH. Do you really think that as an international organization, they can do whatever they want? I think Nick Fury has forgotten who is his founder. I think we should just send troops to suppress them and ask the president to order their forced disbandment. Norton Gary is the current Secretary of Defense of the U.S. military. Although he is now the nominal supreme commander of the U.S. military besides the president, that is just an illusion. There is actually someone else who really speaks the truth. Norton. What do you think, General Freeman and General Wells? As the Minister of Defense, Norman could only stand aside in meetings involving these two people. Although he was sitting as the chairman and these two people were sitting on either side of him, the actual power was with these two people. On the body. It can be said that no one in the United States can move them except the president, who can move them. Wells. What the hell does he do? SHIELD has their reasons for arresting them. Can't we just let Nick Fury make a report later? As the only two generals in the U.S. military, Wells' words almost represent the entire U.S. military, unless General Freeman, who has the same status as him, has any different views. The military jeep has reached the outskirts of New York City, and Captain America Steve randomly picked a place with a pretty good scenery to stop. Bang, bang, there were two slamming sounds of the door closing, and the two got out of the car one after another. So Nick asked you to persuade me. On the way, the U.S. team has basically explained the reason for his appearance in New York. To be honest, Robert really didn't expect Nick Fury to invite him out. Isn't he afraid that due to this matter, Steve, the captain of the future Avengers, whom he appointed himself, will be alienated from Nick Fury? You mean that everything you do is authorized by the government? Faced with people like Captain America, who have a strong sense of responsibility, Robert chose the most effective way to deal with them, using the righteousness of the government and the country to pressure him. Obviously Nick serves that World Security Council, and I take orders from my own country. Captain, who do you think is more important, the interests of the world or the interests of the country? Robert started the serious mode of deception again. He deliberately did not bring the topic to Nick Fury, the director of SHIELD, who ordered Captain America to take Robert to SHIELD without authorization. If Captain America knew that Nick Fury had not received any written authorization in advance, and was apparently just giving orders without permission, he would inevitably have doubts about Nick, and even be alienated from him. Nick may not care for some reasons, but Robert hopes that the Avengers will appear completely in the future, because only then will the appearance of the gems follow history or the plot. If all this is disrupted too much, Robert is really afraid that he will lose the opportunity to touch other gems, which means that he will not be able to obtain the opportunity to transcend. People are destined to have many desires while living in the world. When they are not full, people will just want to be full. When they are full, people want to eat well. When the problem of eating is solved, people's desire will further increase and they want money. As desire or age continues to increase, almost everyone will pursue the ultimate goal of desire. Extend life or become immortal. Robert is no exception. Although he is still very young, like most people, he cannot be satisfied. After he is rich in money and privileges, he also wants to pursue something more rare. The time has come for Captain to choose. Now, do you choose the decision of the US government, or the expectations of the people of the world that may not exist at all? Looking directly into Steve's eyes, Robert will do anything to achieve his goals. He really needs a world where history has not changed much. But if the premise is that he disappears for a period of time or disappears permanently, Robert doesn't mind letting people with such ideas disappear first. Although in the original history S.H.I.E.L.D. accepted the Hulk, Robert could not guarantee that Nick Fury could bear not to study him. After all, his ability seems to be close to divine power to outsiders. He hates the kind of guy whose cannonballs can't penetrate the defense. With this kind of divine power, he can be injured in one blow. How many people can't help but understand this kind of power? Origin. Moreover, Robert still appeared as an ordinary person in the files in his previous life. Steve was silent for a while, and suddenly he seemed to feel relieved. I think the people of the world might need you to go to S.H.I.E.L.D. When Captain America finished saying this, Robert was almost ready to fight him, but he never expected his next words. But I think the United States is a big part of the world and the hope of the world. So I decided to follow the government's decision. TCH, why is the big gangster still the hope of the world? If it disbanded earlier, maybe the world would be safer. Although he was very dissatisfied with Captain America's words, Robert still didn't show it. Instead, he acted happy, as if receiving the support of Captain America was an encouragement to him. Steve, I'm sorry for the decision you made. When the two reached an agreement, they looked at each other and smiled, but unexpectedly, a one-eyed old black man dressed in black suddenly walked out. There is only S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Nick Fury in Marvel who can have such a special appearance. Captain, I'm sorry for your final decision. Since you guys have no intention of cooperating, I think I have to be tougher. After speaking, he waved his hand, and a group of armed men with live ammunition walked out of the deserted bushes and even jungles on the suburban roads. The number of them was at least 300. Steve, I never thought this would happen. Looking at the S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel surrounding him and Robert, Steve felt it was his fault, so he apologized. He also expressed his apology with practical actions. He picked up his shield and made a posture to defend himself against the enemy. Nick Fury was also very upset when he saw this, and now that things have come to an end, he has begun to regret it. If the initial anger may have been caused by the damage to the majesty of S.H.I.E.L.D., then the subsequent mobilization of the 10 action teams under S.H.I.E.L.D. was purely to vent personal anger. Commonly known as the top. But now that we have reached this point, Nick cannot give up without encountering absolute resistance. Captain, give up your fearless struggle and come here. This is your last chance. Nick fought for it in the end because he still valued this captain who served the country and the people very much. Steve not only has the ability, but also has a willing and dedicated heart, which Nick Fury himself feels is very similar to him. Nick Fury, Director of S.H.I.E.L.D., I think you should know what you are doing. Are your actions authorized by the Pentagon? Steve didn't speak, but his attitude was very clear from the action of raising his shield. Seeing that a war was about to break out, Nick Fury wanted to bite the bullet and order action, but then Robert spoke. Nick, S.H.I.E.L.D. is under the direct jurisdiction of the World Security Council, and all its actions are directly authorized by the leaders of the participating countries in the council. After a pause, Nick Fury looked at Robert and said word by word. One of the leaders of the participating countries is the President of the United States. Robert stood opposite the S.H.I.E.L.D. director and almost laughed out loud after hearing his words. Originally, he had prepared for the worst and had a direct conflict with S.H.I.E.L.D., but now Nick's reaction gave Robert a guess. "Nick, I haven't received authorization from the president yet, but I think he will not object. I will give him a written explanation after this time." Jingle. As soon as he finished speaking, his cell phone rang. In an instant, Nick made a gesture of sighing in relief, and then was quickly covered up but was captured by Robert. "It seems we can't fight today." Robert knew quite a bit about Nick Fury. If the S.H.I.E.L.D. leader really wanted to fight with someone, he wouldn't talk nonsense. He wouldn't even show up until his men finished their mission, but this time he rarely showed up before the action. On the surface, he was trying to save Steve, but Sunday felt that Nick had a deeper reason. "Sir, a regiment stationed in New York City is confronting us. They are trying to break through. In addition." Cole's somewhat helpless voice rang on the phone. It turned out to be news that was even worse than it was now. "Nick, go on." Looking at the American soldiers in front of him and the captains of the 7 action teams on his side, Coles brought worse news to Nick Fury. "Sir, according to reliable information, the U.S. military already has a division preparing for action. If anything happens, they are likely to arrive within 15 minutes. The continuous bad news originally made Carlson very powerless when he knew about it, but when the news reached Nick's ears, his reaction was surprisingly dull. "I understand, you should retreat. This operation is declared to be an exercise." For some reason, Carlson, who had been with Nick Fury for a long time, felt relieved in Nick's tone. A hallucination. After muttering something in his mind, Carlson was attracted by the current events. U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. "Everyone, if you don't get out of the way, I think we will have to force our way in." After saying this, the soldiers under his command immediately started to take action. Upon seeing this, Carlson quickly went to prevent an unnecessary misunderstanding. "Lieutenant Colonel, we are just conducting a drill this time. Now that the operation is over, please help yourself." Finding a more respectable excuse, Carlson led the S.H.I.E.L.D. action team to evacuate. On the other side, Nick, who was confronting Steve and Robert, took a deep look at each other and planned to leave Director Fury. But when he was about to withdraw, Robert suddenly called him to stop. Nick turned around with a bit of surprise, not sure what Robert wanted to do. "The current situation is not what I want. I have always had a friendly attitude toward S.H.I.E.L.D. I know you want to know the source of my ability so that I can more effectively maintain world peace." Nick Fury's expression changed several times after Robert spoke, from initial surprise to uncertainty after he took the initiative to show his kindness, to finally happiness after Robert expressed his stance. "If you, Director, can guarantee that you will not restrict my personal freedom, I think I will be very happy to visit S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury. "I'm sorry for my previous offensive behavior. I didn't expect that it almost cost S.H.I.E.L.D. a potential friend." Robert's move is undoubtedly a step up for the current Fury. Nick Fury himself is not a fool. Regardless of whether Robert will go to S.H.I.E.L.D. as he said, but for now, it is better to step down first before thinking about other issues. A crisis was eliminated, and Captain America finally forgave Nick when he apologized, and after sending Robert home, he followed him back to S.H.I.E.L.D. "I really envy you for having a house like this. Robert, you can have it anytime if you want. Ha ha ha, you and I both know that's impossible. If I go back to the army now, what rank should they give me? General or Marshal?" The last words Steve said before leaving left Robert speechless. It is true that Captain America was praised too highly during World War II. At that time, many Americans even asked him to run for president. Although the subsequent death of the U.S. Army and the end of the war weakened this voice, for some special reasons, the U.S. military needs a spiritual leader. Steve, who died in the war and made great contributions before the war, became a target of the U.S. military. At that time, Captain America was promoted as a dead man by the top brass of the U.S. military at the time. He could not threaten their position anyway, so with the help of various factors, he was almost transformed into a god. Just live in the story. If he suddenly appears in the world one day, perhaps the most embarrassing people will be those who promote him. Robert thought to himself that it was a good thing that he didn't have the blessing of the protagonist's halo like Captain America, otherwise if he was the one being promoted, he might not be able to live the life he is living now. When he got home, he habitually turned on the TV as background music. The only thing Robert wanted to do now was to open the stock market and see the latest Stark stock price. $451 per share. It seems to have gone up a bit. Wait, $451 per share. He wiped his eyes in disbelief, and after realizing that he had indeed read correctly, he quickly changed the TV channel that was playing the soap opera to the news channel. Tony Stark was found last night. Affected by this news, Stark's stock price has been rising continuously since last night. The latest and hottest news was playing on the news. When Robert saw that Tony was about to hold a press conference in 3 hours, he was so frightened that he could not hold his hands firmly. How could it be so fast? As he spoke, Robert hurriedly sold the more than 300,000 shares of Stark Company he held. He was really Tony after being stimulated in Afghanistan and came back to cut off the most profitable department of his company. This almost offsets the news of his salvation, because the loss of Stark's pillar industry and the loss of his soul are similar, and may even be more serious. It was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon when Robert sold all the stocks. Due to the good news that Tony had been found, Robert had almost no worries about selling the stocks in his hand. Account balance, $160 million. Robert made a net profit of $50 million through this wave. He felt that making money like this was like robbing money. So I decided to shut down Stark Industries' weapons business. Just like in history, Tony started his operation. Fortunately, Robert, who had a profit, successfully escaped. If he had found out about Tony's return 2 hours later, it is very likely that more than $100 million would have been trapped. Perhaps money is the least important thing in his eyes. While he was sighing about life, he didn't know that General Wells in the Pentagon was angry that his plan failed. Old Mousy is really useless. Shield Nick Fury had come to his senses at this time, and he was keenly aware that he was being used with a gun today. Sitting in the office looking towards the direction of the Pentagon. Snort. With a slight hum, Nick picked up the dedicated phone. Natasha Romanoff, agent, your mission is temporarily over, I have more important things for you to deal with. A secret contest began, and Robert didn't care much about it. I'm afraid today's things are not that simple. After watching Tony announce his decision on TV, his uncle and company chairman Obadi was there trying to explain. What Robert was thinking about was that he was surrounded today. Shield Chief Nick Fury was probably just being used. This can be seen from his attitude when he first appeared, and in the end it seemed that the US military had solved the siege for Robert. There are traces of a series of conspiracies behind this. If Robert doesn't want to pay attention to these, he must have enough strength. It seems that I have to get the weapon Howard prepared for me. Watching Tony being gradually taken away from the camera on the TV, Robert muttered to himself. Robert always did what he said. He just picked up the phone and wanted to call Dean and ask him to help look up Tony's number, but as soon as he raised his hand, Robert hesitated. Forget it. Sighing in his heart, Robert finally exited the dial-up interface, opened the mobile browser, and searched for Tony's address. Don't doubt that for an arrogant and face-loving playboy, his home address is definitely not difficult to find online. In Tony Stark's residence in California, Tony, who had just downsized the reactor, the first thing he did after returning home was to upgrade the old version made in the cave. Tony, Pepper, can you do me a little favor? Pepper, what? Help me change something, ah. With that said, Tony put the new reactor he had just upgraded into Pepper's hands, and he unplugged the old model. Pepper, is that what made you escape from that place? Tony, that's right, okay, now, there's a wire attached to the bottom of this thing, all you have to do is plug it in. Isn't there any danger in this? Won't. Seeing Tony's determined eyes, Pepper tentatively held the wire with one hand and inserted the other hand into the hole in Tony's chest. Oh, what is this? A wet and greasy feeling, as if touching the nose, made Pepper uncomfortable and couldn't help but scream. Tony was about to answer that it was an organic compound, but a blue light hole suddenly appeared in front of his eyes and interrupted him. Oh, where did we go this time? Walking out of the space door he made was a simple application of Robert's space power. In his heyday, he could even open hundreds of such doors at the same time. Even though he has internal injuries and cannot release the power of space unscrupulously, he can still maintain such a wicket for a while. Did you come right this time? After searching the internet for a long time, he found several places that seemed to be Tony's address. Robert didn't want to use his military connections anymore, so he had to use stupid methods to try them one by one. The first location is in New York, just drive there. If this location isn't there, the second location in Washington might be a bit far. Robert touched his chin more than 10 minutes ago. At this time, he was still thinking about things with normal thinking. Hiss, this internal injury is starting to hurt again. Suddenly, when Robert was thinking about how to travel, the injury on his chest caused by the power of space reminded him. Snapped. As soon as he patted his head, Robert suddenly thought, I already have the power of space, one of the most powerful forces in the universe, with me, so what else can I rely on to keep going? As he spoke, Robert began to practice. He applied the power of space in front of him, and a chaotic space crack was formed in an instant. Its interior was disordered, and the other end could be any existing space. Extremely dangerous places such as the endless void, the surface of the sun, and the center of a black hole may be where this disorderly crack leads. What Robert has to do now is to change disorder into order, and make the place it leads to the place he wants to reach. At first he set his own home as the goal. When he put his idea into practice, he found that it was extremely simple. Dong, dong, dong. A plastic cup was thrown into the space crack in front of him by Robert, and then a space crack suddenly appeared behind him and the plastic cup fell out of it. After experimenting with several items in succession without any accidents, Robert began the human experiment. Hiss. Who? He opened a space crack in front of him, took a deep breath, exhaled, closed his eyes and walked in. When, there was a feeling of weightlessness for that moment, and then he quickly returned to normal. When he felt that he had stepped onto solid ground, he opened his eyes and found that he was back at home again. Success. Robert immediately unlocked a brand new gameplay and named it Space Gate. After this, his mind was opened up, and he began to try some strange ideas, such as leaving the house without opening the door, which is commonly known as walking through the wall. Applying the power of space to the wall, Robert tried to pass his body through, but people came over the first few times, but after the power of space dissipated, the wall disappeared. Looking at the big hole in the load-bearing wall, Robert suddenly realized that he seemed to be in trouble. After hesitating for a few seconds, forget it, it's not worth a lot of money. If you don't want it, you should try to see if you can pass through the wall first. If you can really achieve it, watch the young lady take a shower. Ahem, wouldn't it be convenient to stop bad guys from watching the young lady take a bath? With the intention of protecting all young and beautiful ladies in the future, Robert began to continue trying on his own house. But this time he learned the lesson and deliberately avoided the load-bearing position and experimented on a thinner wall. Failure. After several consecutive failures, several large holes appeared inside and outside the villa. Those who didn't know might think that rats as tall as a person lived in them. This is the 15th experiment. If it fails again, we won't do it again. It seems that even if the load-bearing objects can be avoided, the villa with more than a dozen holes is already a bit shaky now. But at this time, Robert was already jealous. He just didn't believe that he had even built something as tall as the gate to space. How could he not be able to get one through the wall? The internal output power should be controlled as small as possible, and the external power should be appropriately increased. After 14 failures, Robert did not gain nothing, but he already had a solution to the problem. Call. Gudong. A gust of wind blew, and the originally solid villa felt like it was being shaken by the wind. Robert, who was still in the villa, was so frightened that he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. But things have already progressed to this point, and if he still fails, then the villa will be destroyed in vain. In his last attempt, Robert stepped across the big blue hole made of space energy in front of him without hesitation. After leaving the house without any hindrance, Robert immediately turned around to check where he had just come out. When the power of space slowly dissipated, a solid wall appeared where it should have been. After looking at the wall without any problems for a long time, Robert realized that another skill of his had been unlocked. Before he could be happy, the dilapidated villa ruined his good mood. What did I want to do in the first place? Based on the principle of out of sight, out of mind, Robert began to think about why he studied the power of space in the first place. After a few seconds, he remembered and immediately opened a space door and left the villa. Maybe he would have to find a place to live in the future. The first coordinate is not, the second coordinate is not. Following the information found on the internet, Robert began to search for Tony's address. Robert visited bustling downtowns, public toilets, and wilderness jungles one by one. However, none of them were the target he wanted. Well, the last location is in California. If something goes wrong again, I'm afraid I'll have to ask Dean. Robert doesn't want to trouble others, but he is definitely not the kind of stubborn person. When faced with a problem that he cannot solve or requires a lot of time to solve, he doesn't mind taking shortcuts. A blue light hole appeared in his home, right in front of Tony himself. Tony was still thinking that this was a holographic projection made for him as a joke. But when Robert walked out of the light hole without warning, Tony no longer had the idea of mocking the person who was joking. Pepper, what do you mean those slimy things? Tony. Pepper saw that she had not received a response for a long time, so she subconsciously raised her head. When she saw Tony staring ahead with wide eyes, she also looked over curiously. Oh, who are you? Pepper didn't see clearly how Robert appeared. She only knew that a stranger suddenly appeared in her home, and she subconsciously shouted out. Hey, don't. Tony originally wanted to gag Pepper and remind her in a low voice, but it was too late. Robert had already heard the sound and turned around. Well, did I come at the wrong time? In front of him was a shirtless man lying on something similar to an operating bed. What was not particularly special was that there was a hole in his chest. Who are you? When Tony saw that the other party had discovered the existence of the two of them, he immediately asked, which made him appear stronger. Well, I think it's more important that you install that thing than this. After speaking, Robert chose a distant seat and sat down, then motioned for Tony and the others to continue. Seeing that he was really sitting there without any malicious intent, Tony and Pepper looked at each other. The other party immediately understood, and without any hesitation before, he reached into Tony's body and plugged in the wire. Oh, Pepper, are you okay? Didn't you say there's no danger? However, I don't know if Ms. Pepper was in a hurry, which caused the wire to touch the metal fixation layer on Tony's body, which would cause confusion in his body functions and make him uncomfortable. 5 minutes later, Tony, who finally recovered, looked up at Robert and found that he was still sitting there obediently. Then his body relaxed and he lay back down again. I'm sorry, Tony, I didn't know this would happen. Pepper was still feeling guilty, but Tony interrupted her in time. Pepper, there are guests here, I think you should go up and make a cup of coffee or something. After saying that, she quietly glanced at her. Pepper was indeed a woman who only had Tony in her eyes. She had even forgotten that Robert was there just now, and she didn't remember until she was reminded now. Oh, okay. Pursing her lips, Pepper glanced back at Tony, and then left here anxiously. As she left, she looked at Robert from the corner of her eye from time to time, as if she was afraid that he would suddenly call her. When Pepper completely disappeared on the stairs upstairs, Tony quietly breathed a sigh of relief. How about we can talk now? Tony. Okay, what are we talking about? Robert could see Tony's vigilance, and he was afraid that no matter what he said, he would use this to delay time, probably in order to wait for Ms. Pepper's reinforcements. You don't need to speak, let me tell you a story first. Tony. Story? What story? Fairy tale. Obviously, Tony, who is used to a strong life, will not bow down easily, and Robert certainly has a way to cure him. It's a bit similar, even a little bit more like a fantasy story. It's related to a man named Howard. If you keep quiet, I don't mind telling you it in one breath. When Robert said Howard's name, Tony was indeed quiet, but only after saying a word. If you dare to use my father's name to fabricate lies to deceive me, you will end badly, I guarantee it. Robert didn't care about his threats and began to concentrate on telling his story. The first time Howard and I met was during a mission in 1943. At that time, he was as famous as you. After that mission, Howard built a weapon specially for me, but due to technology the reason is that it cannot be carried and used temporarily. Then on my last mission, my opponent was an organization called Hydra. Their leader, the Red Skull, used a magical thing to create a weapon that could destroy half of the world. That thing made his fantasy come true and ultimately destroyed it. Lost him. After the Red Skull disappeared inexplicably, I subconsciously caught the thing. When I realized that it was extremely dangerous, I had already caught it, but nothing happened to me at that time until a freeze came to this day 70 years later. In 10 minutes, Robert told the truth about his encounter with Howard in 1943 and what happened after that. Tony Stark's expression changed from disapproval at the beginning to half-belief after the story was told. But in fact, he believed it more. This was because of a series of behaviors after Robert appeared. But he still has concerns. Tony, who is a scientist, is destined to have a certain cautious character and will not completely believe others just because of their words. Tony, why should I believe you? Is there any proof that what you say is true? It's time to show off your strength, Robert said in his heart. Originally, he wanted to pretend to walk from Tony through the space gate to behind Tony, but suddenly he had a bold idea. I think this thing can prove it a little bit. After speaking, Robert began to gather space energy in his hand in front of Tony, and patiently shaped it into a shape similar to a blade. It's down there. Tony is still in there, and the guy who didn't know why he appeared is also there. Dang dang dang. A burst of messy and rapid footsteps accompanied Pepper's shout, and at this time Robert's gadget was ready. Bang. The space energy similar to a weapon in Robert's hand was thrown out at once, and no object on the path of the space energy visible to the naked eye could stop it. No matter whether it is hard machinery or walls made of reinforced concrete, it cannot block its path, and anything on the road it flies over will disappear without a trace. It wasn't until the blue blade composed of space power disappeared that everyone came back to their senses. When Tony came back to his senses, he basically believed what Robert said. After all, the thing just now could kill him completely, so there was no need to coax him here. The Tony bodyguards who had just come down, led by Happy, came to their senses in shock. Happy looked at the 4 men and 1 woman behind him, and there were only 6 of them including himself. He couldn't help but swallowed when he thought about the move the mysterious man had just made. Maybe we can go back and call more people now. What he whispered was shot back with a look from Pepper. Of course Happy couldn't admit that he wanted to escape. In order to prove himself, he could only bite the bullet and rush in to protect Tony. Happy led the 4 bodyguards to deliberately take a route that bypassed Robert. For this reason, he did not hesitate to take a few extra steps. This was a very difficult decision for a fat man. Tony, we are here to protect you. Happy hid behind the 4 bodyguards and said to Tony on the side. Tony, yes, I saw it, but I hope you can hurry up next time. If you keep up this speed, maybe my death anniversary can be brought forward. Happy, it was an accident this time. He obviously heard Tony's accusation, and it was true that he didn't react in time this time, so he didn't have the confidence to refute. What to do with Tony? Pepper was the one who walked straight to Tony in front of Robert, and she didn't know who gave her the courage. Tony, no, I think we should not think about solving him, lest he solves it. He struggled to get up, and Happy immediately helped him up. Thanks, Happy. What he didn't expect was that Tony only used him as a support, and finally chose to be supported by Pepper. Maybe this was the same gender repulsion. So Robert, is it right for me to call you that? Or do you need me to call you uncle? Tony was supported by Pepper and came to Robert and asked an unexpected question. Whatever. Robert was thinking about something just now, that is, he discovered that he could continue to supply energy after his space blade was fired. Does that mean in theory that as long as my body can hold it, it can keep flying? Robert suddenly had a wonderful idea, but suddenly he saw Tony looking at him with an unkind look, and suddenly recalled his previous question and suddenly reacted. No need to call me uncle, just call me Robert. Tony's expression improved after he said this. It was obvious that Robert had guessed correctly that Tony cared about this. Robert was the one who didn't care about the issue of address, but someone else did. Pepper, Uncle, Happy, Robert. There were 4 bodyguards at the scene who also realized that there was something to eat, but Tony was not in the habit of discussing it in front of many outsiders. Happy, please take your people and retreat first. I really hope you can come earlier next time, otherwise maybe I will fire you before my short life ends. Tony smiled and told Happy, but Happy could only accept it, because it was indeed his mistake this time. Okay, boss. Reluctantly looking at the culprit who caused him to be ignored by his boss, Robert, Happy could only look at him bitterly and then left. Pepper had been staring at Robert and Tony since Happy left. She couldn't figure out why a man who looked as old as a high school student could become Tony's uncle. Tony. Okay, put away your guessing eyes and let me tell you. Unable to stand the look in Pepper's eyes, Tony briefly told her Robert's identity. So he is really your uncle, ah. Pepper murmured, suddenly realizing that Tony's elders were also her elders. Pepper. Uncle Robert, I'm sorry, I just offended. After reacting, Pepper hurriedly apologized to Robert, but her move made Tony blush. Robert, who originally felt weird being called uncle by a beautiful woman, finally decided to give him face again after looking at Tony's eyes. To be honest, you really don't need to call me uncle. My actual age is even younger than you, so just call me Robert, just to avoid making everyone awkward. Tony. Yes, Pepper, just call him Mr. Robert. There is no need to call him old. You should know that at his age, he may not have a girlfriend yet. Don't let the girls misunderstand him because of your name. Pepper. Is that so? Robert. Yes. Seeing Robert's cooperation, Tony couldn't help but give him a satisfied look, and then thought about taking Pepper away to discuss some issues alone. Pepper, I think you really have to go make a cup of coffee this time. Robert is a real guest now. We have to be polite, don't we? Oh, yes. After Tony said this, Pepper was sent away and hurried upstairs to make coffee. Now you and I are the only ones left here. What are you doing here? You can't just come here to tell me a story, right? Tony, who no longer needed support, walked to Robert and sat down, asking him. Well, I think I made it clear just now. Your father made a knife for me, and now I'm here to get it. Tony, I think Howard wouldn't give that thing away casually. Now, tell me about your conditions at the time. When Robert saw this, he couldn't help but admire his shrewdness, but in the end he still wanted to struggle. Why not? Does Captain America know? He just got a shield from your father. Robert was stunned as soon as he finished speaking. It turned out that Tony took out a holographically projected bill and placed it in front of Robert. This is a receipt from Stark Company during my father's time. Among it is Captain America's shield, which was paid for by the government, but your record is not found in it, Robert. With the bright documents in front of him, Robert thought that Captain America was getting weapons for free thanks to the halo of the protagonist, and he also used this as an excuse to get the weapons, which made Robert's fantasy come to nothing. Okay, your father did put forward a condition to me at that time. Seeing that he could not fool Tony, Robert could only tell the truth. Tony. So my father's condition in exchange is for you to take action 3 times. Robert. Yes, that's right. Tony looked at Robert for a while and found no flaws, and finally believed him. Okay, then let's go find the treasure you mentioned. To be honest, I still have an impression of it. It should be one of my father's most precious things. At the end, Tony did not forget to state the preciousness of what Robert asked for in order to drive up the price. Collection area. After rummaging around, Tony and Robert failed to find the knife made of vibranium. Pepper, your coffee is ready. Are you looking for something? Maybe I can help. He raised his head from a pile of items and saw Pepper coming down with coffee. Tony hurriedly walked up and picked up a cup of coffee, took a sip and said, "Thank God, a helper finally came. I didn't know I had so many collections. Come and help Pepper, let's find another knife." After saying that, he put the coffee tray aside, and Tony pulled Miss Pepper to be his coolie. Pepper. Oh, okay. Robert had been rummaging there from beginning to end, and now he had basically confirmed that the knife was not here. Suddenly he noticed that there was a junk scrap area in the distance. Hey, there's no way there's anything you want, I guarantee. Watching Robert walking towards the scrap area, Tony said confidently to his back. However, the embarrassing thing is that as soon as Robert walked to the scrap area, he found the knife that Howard had made for himself among the many materials named trash. It's impossible for me to put such important things there. Those are all garbage waiting to be processed. Tony, who didn't know that Robert had seen something, was still promising. Open eyes. Robert pulled out a knife from the scraps, and Tony, who had just vowed just now, had a frozen expression on his face. Robert was too lazy to care about him now, and reached out to pick up the vibranium knife. Tony had already come over at this time. Hearing Robert's doubtful voice, he also put his eyes on the knife. Any questions? Tony asked Robert after looking over and finding nothing wrong. Didn't you notice that it wasn't firing? Robert put the knife in front of Tony and showed him. Tony, what's this? Although this thing is hard, there are still substances on the earth that can make it open. You give it to me and I will help you open it, but under this condition. Hee. Robert knew that Tony was ready to raise the price, but he had no choice but to sharpen the blade by himself. He really couldn't do it. I can find your father's treasures in the garbage. It seems that your family is indeed very rich. Even the treasures can be thrown away as rubbish. In addition to the knife, Robert came here with the intention of making friends with Tony, so he didn't really care if he raised the price, but it had to be based on the premise that both parties were equal. And this seemingly sarcastic remark was also a test of Tony. He wanted to see Tony before he made any conditions. I swear, I definitely didn't throw this here. Faced with Robert's sarcasm and some questioning tone, Tony did not lose his temper arrogantly but began to explain. Pepper, do you know who it is? Pepper. I don't know, maybe it's cleaning. At this time, she saw that Tony was serious, and she immediately did not dare to say that she usually cleaned this place herself, and instead passed the blame to the indoor cleaning. Tony, get her off immediately, I don't need someone who messes with things. Robert stood aside and looked at Tony, who was a little angry. Whether it was true or false, it represented an attitude. Okay Tony, I believe you, then let's talk about the terms now. Walking over and patting him on the shoulder, Robert was obviously satisfied with Tony's reaction. Oh, I really didn't know those people would mess with things. Just now, did you mean the conditions were right? He seemed to be still angry and a little dizzy, as if he didn't hear Robert's words clearly. Yes, I mean let's talk about the conditions. After saying it again, Tony nodded after making sure he heard it clearly. Suddenly he didn't know if he was a little hungry because he was angry and consumed too much. I raised my watch and saw that after a lot of trouble, it was already midnight, almost early morning. Tony, are you hungry? A bit. Pepper, go prepare 2 midnight snacks for us, okay. If you're hungry too, prepare 3. Pepper. Oh. She was a little confused. She didn't know what conditions the two people were talking about just now suddenly wanted to eat. But even if she didn't know the reason, Tony had already told her that she could only prepare the supper obediently. Okay, everyone has left, now tell me what you want to do. Are you leaving? Well, okay. Tony also specifically looked towards the stairs, and he was relieved when he found that Pepper had really disappeared on the stairs. I don't need you to do too much for me. I have the ability to solve future problems, but now I have more important things. So, Robert raised his eyebrows and guessed what Tony wanted him to do, but he was not sure yet, so he asked. There is only one condition in exchange for this knife, and that is that you go check something for me. When I was captured by terrorists in Afghanistan, they showed me a batch of weapons, all of which were products of Stark. Robert, I guess those things didn't come out through your hands, did they? Tony said without hesitation, of course. But suddenly he remembered something. His face suddenly stiffened, and he said the words even though he didn't want to. Maybe someone else did it in my name. It goes without saying that someone can do things in Tony's name. Except for his secretary Pepper, no one else really has that ability. This should be the reason for sending her away. I need you to investigate the reason for the leakage of that batch of arms. I just need to investigate and I can solve it myself. What about this condition? Robert knew that the source of his confidence was nothing more than the steel suit that later became world famous. Okay, this is not difficult for me. Robert shrugged his shoulders indifferently, and he was indeed as relaxed as he appeared. If he wasn't afraid that Tony would suspect him of being a ghost or something, Robert would be able to reveal the mole in Stark Company right now. Good, it's yours now. As he spoke, Tony put the knife made of vibranium into Robert's hand, his movements almost as if he had some other intention. You just decided to give me an unedged knife. What can I do with it? Can I kill the enemy with one knife? Robert's current reaction was obviously what Tony wanted to see, and he now had a bright expression on his face. He seemed to be saying it in a playful way just for fun. Don't you have the ability to control space? You can try to put that thing on the knife. Maybe it will be more effective than the original knife. Robert took Tony's joke seriously. As if a door had been opened by something brand new, he directly applied the power of space on the knife. Then, the power of space, condensed from Robert's hand, was instantly transferred to the sword, and the blade was instantly covered with blue space energy. If Robert hadn't been holding it, even a weapon made of vibranium would have been swallowed by space. Oh by it. Tony held his head, unable to believe that Robert had actually pulled off his joke. Come and chop this to test its power. Tony, who was not too concerned about the excitement, pointed at the steel pipe in the room and asked Robert to test its power. Wave, slashing towards the steel pipe, it was like holding a water jet in an instant. The steel pipe melted into the water without any resistance, but the section that was chopped never appeared again. Oh my God, what an invincible ability! From Tony's perspective, the steel pipe was cut in half instantly, and he couldn't help but be surprised when he saw no resistance at all. It's just average. After curling his lips, Robert planned to take away the power of space. It could be seen from his words that he was a little disappointed. This is also true, because he can make a light knife condensed from the power of space out of thin air, and the effect is similar to the current light knife based on vibranium. Seeing that Robert seemed a little dissatisfied, although he didn't understand the reason, Tony still said it for his own benefit. I think that thing just now is very good. Although I don't know why you are not satisfied, I regret to inform you that I do not support returns. After giving Tony a speechless look, Robert said in order to make him relax. I didn't even think about returning it. Seeing that his expression didn't look like he was being hypocritical, Tony believed it and spoke out. So much the better. As he spoke, Robert put the knife in his hand in front of Tony, saying that he asked him to keep it for him. In fact, it was because he had lost interest in it. But one thing Robert may not realize is that all the energy he gathered just now was put on the knife. His body only existed as a medium at this time, so the pressure he endured was minimal. And if he simply uses the power of space to make a disembodied weapon, then he will become a carrier that carries this energy, and the pressure on his body will naturally be great. If Robert could understand this and use the vibranium knife properly, his combat power would be improved by several levels, but alas. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.